and ultimately again you could drink the wine. The shar asuin achiyiftiku. But the rest of the barrels will be usher ultimately again until they also are opened. Why? Because we can't submit the remaining barrels by simply saying that the truma was contained in the majority of barrels. Okay, incredible. So let's go back there. So now back to the Mishnah. So remember again, the Mishnah was dealing with different cases of a prohibited animal that gets mixed in with other sacrificial animals. So one of the cases of the Mishnah is if you have an animal that was used for immoral purposes that gets mixed in with the rest of the group. So the Mishnah said that halacha you allow the group to graze until it develops a mum. Then you go ahead and you sell off the animals, and you use the value of the most expensive animal to purchase your replacement carbon. Says the Gemara, so included in this group is a treifa animal that gets mixed in. So the Gemara says, Bishlam Kulu Lo Yediya, Halachai treifa hechidami. What's the case of treifa? The Gemara says, in all these other cases, let's say an animal that was used for immoral purposes. I know the animal got in, but obviously that animal was not discernible. Like I don't know what that is. But I'm asking, what's the case of treifa? The Gemara says, listen to this. What's the case of treifa? If you could tell which animal is the treifa, then what? Then go and remove it from the group. And if you don't know, in other words, if you're not sure if it's a treifa or not, in other words, so here's the interesting part about a treifa. A treifa could be an animal also with an internal condition that you really wouldn't know about before after shkita. So what technically what I'm saying is, if it's a discernible condition, then just remove it from the flock. If it's not discernible, then how do you know that it's a treifa to begin with? Which the Gemara says, it's very interesting. How come I'm asking what's the case over here? So listen to this. You had two animals. One animal was pierced by a thorn, and the other animal was bitten by a wolf. So apparently, Rashi points out over here that when an animal would get bitten by a wolf, ultimately the animal would die of a wolf bite. It's poisonous. I don't know, maybe some type of wolf, maybe the wolf was rabid, whatever the case. The interesting part is the injury is inflicted by a thorn, and apparently again, the injury of a wolf bite, I guess, looks similar. The Gemara is presupposing it looks similar. So what ends up happening is I know that I have an animal that was pierced by a thorn or bitten by a wolf, and these animals are mixed into the group. So therefore, I can't tell which is which. That's the first approach. And therefore, again, obviously, animal bitten by a wolf, that's treifa. So this could go and be already been a fula. Interestingly enough, there was an animal that fell off, let's say fell off a raised area. And I will say that animal got mixed in. So externally, that animal looks the same. The Gemara says, Nami for a second. And therefore, the concern over here is that the animal that fell down from an elevation is a treifa. The Fula Nami, so even if the animal fell down to you could check it. In other words, I will say there is ultimately, again, a bedika. That was interestingly enough, what's the bedika for an animal that fell off? In other words, how do you know if an animal fell off an elevated area? If it's a treifa or not? So actually, because how big it can walk. If the animal could walk, that's a good indication it's not a treifa. If it can't walk, that's a good indication it is a treifa. So in other words, if you're concerned, just check the animal. Kasabar under treifa in its place. Also treifa bedika. Because this particular kind of holds that ultimately, again, even if the animal is able to walk, the only way to know that it's not a treifa is if it leaves for like 24 hours. Ultimately, again, and if it walked, ultimately, again, still you would require internal examination. So Rabbi says, go
I can't. Good job, colleague.
Piece of their treifa is where it's the offspring of the treifa that got mixed into the sacrificial group. And Rabbi had been told that the offspring of a treifa is ultimately again unfit for sacrificial use. Now here's what's interesting. Now the offspring of a treifa, fascinatingly enough, could be totally and wholly healthy on its own. Its disqualification is that it's the offspring of a treifa. So I will say, point over here is these are all three different opinions. as to what the case of the treifa is in the Mishnah. And is no matter which opinion you hold, like halacha l'maisa, you can't distinguish the treifa from the rest of the tevra. Hence, the Mishnah says you have to allow the whole sacrificial group to graze until they develop movement and then sell them off. Now the Gemara just says, Rabbi Elazar the Amar, sorry, Vlad the treifa you can be done again. We just said, Rabbi Elazar is of the opinion that the offspring of a treifa cannot be used for sacrificial purposes. Now the Gemara says, Kudu Rabbi Yanai Amri. Now the Gemara is going to discuss why each opinion does not agree with the other. So the other two opinions don't hold like Rabbi Yanai. Why? They say, the Gemara says, the Jews has said, maybe people can't tell the difference between a wolf fight and a whole made or a puncture made by a thorn. Why? I must get by other. So apparently, again, a wolf's bite is elongated versus a thorn puncture is circular. Okay? It's like a salami. They don't hold like a sluggish like a sabri under in the sheep of deep in the ace legs. If they hold an animal fell off an elevation, but if it stand, it does not require any further examination. Holcott, when what the animal actually walks, in a sheep of a deep does not require internal examination after its slaughter. And ultimately, again, they don't hold it to why? The Gemara says, because they don't hold it to because again, they hold that last treifa ultimately again is going to be permitted. Alright, so bottom line of both sides, the opinions discussing, the opinions don't agree with each other. The bottom line for us is halacha l'maisa. That's three different opinions as to what the case of the treifa is in the Mishnah. Beautiful. Let's go back there. The kachim min benino. So remember again, the last part of the Mishnah, the last part of the Mishnah was very interesting. The last part of the Mishnah is if you have different karbanos mixed in. Let me just read to you from the Mishnah. The Mishnah said, kachim b'kachim min benino. Right? Let's say you have different karbanos that are mixed in with each other. Right? Same type of carbon, all mixed in with each other. So what's the issue in that case? The issue in that case is we don't know who the owner is. Right? So let's say Reuben, Shimon, Levi, Yehuda, this is a good parsha, right? All the Chevra, right? Everybody's born in this parsha. Not everybody, you better get up to Yosef. Everybody's born in this parsha. So now let's say they all had karbanos. Their karbanos, let's say they all had shlamim, for argument's sake, right? So therefore, all of their karbanos got mixed together. So the Mishnah says, what's the halacha? No problem. Just offer it up. Just let the Kohen go ahead and offer them up. And even though we don't know explicitly which animal belongs to which person, it's okay. It's okay. The Kohen will just simply go ahead and have in mind this is Reuben's carbon, this is Shimon's carbon. Again, even though he doesn't know which animal is which. So he says, 1 second. One second, you need smicha. So let's remember again, smicha is the act of leaning on the animal. So again, you can't do smicha if you don't know which is your animal. So how is this being offered up? So Rabbi Yosef, the carbon nashim. You're right. The Mishnah is talking about women's karbanos. So women don't do smicha. Women don't have a din of smicha. Smicha is a din by men. So the Mishnah wants to be talking about women's karbanos that don't require smicha. So the Gemara says, okay, about the carbon nashim. What's he telling then that the Mishnah's halacha would not apply to men? So as if I have a group of men's karbanos that gets mixed in, even though again it's all the same type of karbanos, you're telling me then you couldn't offer it. Right? You couldn't offer it since smicha ultimately again is not possible. So which the Gemara says, well, that's the top of mine. Hey, good 75 day, it's the Abai is the kasha, carbon yachid, shinis arab, the carbon yachid. The carbon seaber, shnis arab, the carbon seaber. So let's say the following case, you have an individual carbon that gets mixed with another individual carbon, or a carbon seaber that gets mixed with another carbon seaber. The carbon yachid, the carbon seaber, shnis arab, or for that matter again, a carbon yachid and a carbon seaber that get mixed together. No same dalid matanos, we call echad ve'echad. So let's say, so what do? You do 4 blood applications, ultimately again, from each and every carbon. This way, again, you're covering all of the blood applications, all the possibilities. In nasa matana echad, then nasa mikol echad yatsa. Sorry, in nasa matana mikol echad yatsa. And if you did 1 matana from each, ultimately again, we yotze as well. Then nasa arba mikul yatsa. And if you did 4 from each, ultimately again, we yotze as well. So again, we actually saw this before. And when you have carbonates that get mixed together, we're going to see this again on Keh Medalit. When you get kabbalas that get mixed together, essentially what you do is you kind of appeal to the highest common denominator, and you're yotze. When is this so? This is when the animals were mixed together. They got mixed together while they were still alive. About this arvu shtuti, but it's halakha and they got mixed together post slaughter. Then no say arba matzanos mikulan. You give 4 matanos from all of them. And ultimately, if you did 1 matana from all of them, ultimately you're yotze. Okay, we'll see that it's being brought down. Rabbi already says, lowness hamatana. Now, we'll say, this so far unrelated, you see what is being brought up. This has to be an interesting fact. But this is lowness hamatana. We look at the actual amount of blood for the blood application. In each, what could they was that, shira, in Psula. So let's say we've actually never seen this before in all of our travels through Scotland about what do you think of blood applications? Is there a shear? Right? Is there an amount of blood that actually has to be applied? So Rabbi is the first person who comes along and says, by the way, when it comes to matanos, in this case over here, because you're doing a matana, but for potentially multiple kavanos, so that is, you have to make sure that in the blood application, there's enough blood for each of the kavanos. Now, we've never seen that before. Again, like I said, so Katani, nothing Dunya Dixie blood. Now, both are interestingly enough, according to this price that we just mentioned, we are comparing an individual carbon to a communal carbon. Not seaboard Gavri, Aflachit Gavri, just like seaboard, ultimately again is brought on behalf of men. So to again, the Yochid, the carbon Yochid we must be talking about, is also talking about men. And let's take a step back over here. What was the Mishnah's case? The Mishnah's case was that a bunch of people get their carbonos mixed together. Right now, the good news is, what's the good news? Same type of carbon. Bad news, we don't know whose carbon belongs to. Mishnah says, no problem. What do? Just offer them all up, and the Kohen will just have in mind that whoever's carbon belongs to whoever should ultimately, again, should work out. And then everybody's carbon should go ahead and satisfy their obligations. I have a Gemara, 1 second. What about smicha? What was the answer to that? Women's carbonos. That is din of mixed carbonos. Mixed up carbonos is only a din by women's carbonos that don't require smicha. And by inference, if it would be men's carbonos, then this mechanism, this advice would not work. So let's say, the Gemara then quotes the Brisa. The Brisa is talking about a case of mixed carbonos. And it's telling you that what? You could offer them up. Now it says, carbon seabird, carbon yachid. Now the Gemara says, just like a carbon seabird is a men's carbon, because also interestingly enough, the way the Gemara understands carbonos seabird, like for example, carbonos seabird in general, whenever you have a communal carbon, that is generally the criteria is based on the male population. So just like a carbon seabird ultimately is a men's carbon, so too carbon yachid is talking about a men's carbon. And what do you see from here? That in the case of mixed up carbonos, you can offer it up, obviously without smicha. That contradicts what we said before. To which the Gemara says, Amar Rava says, with this bara, Rava says, hold on. You're presupposing that the version of the Brisa that you're reading right now is correct. How do you know it's correct? The Gemara says, Diktani Banadam, where what is this so? Kishan is Abu Chayim. Remember again, we spoke of this idea. The Brisa just said before, when is this so? When the Kabbalas were mixed up while they were alive. About this Arbu Shputin, that they were mixed up once they were slaughtered, low. Then this does it. But now it comes along and I don't understand. Mali Chayim, Mali Shputin. What are you talking about? What does it matter if the Kabbalas were alive or they were slaughtered already? The same Allah should apply. Allah, these are the means to say. When is this so? Shis Arbu Shchutin Kein Chayim Bikosos. And ultimately, again, when is this so? When is this halacha so? That in other words, that you could do these blood applications that work for everything. That's ultimately, again, when they are mixed together, even if they're slaughtered, but like they're alive. What's the case? Bikosos. Ultimately, again, where you have the blood of each of these kabbanos in individual receptacles. About the bolel, but ultimately, again, if it's mixed together, no same valid matanos to Kulan. We do 4 blood applications for all of the collective kabbanas. We nasa matana achos, the Kulan yasa, and ultimately, again, if you did 1 blood application for all of them, then you are yotze. So we'll say, what's the point over here? The point over here is that the Gemara is saying that this is not talking about live animals. That's the point there. It's not talking about live animals. Rather, it's talking about animals that have already been slaughtered, and the Gemara is talking about the blood got mixed up. In other words, so that's what's over here. In other words, so which means that what? There was smicha. In other words, when the animals were alive, we knew exactly who everything belonged to. They did smicha, they did shchita. Now we're up to this. Now we're up to this time of zrika, blood application. And now what ends up happening? Now everything gets mixed up. And there's 2 different cases of either that individual receptacles of blood or all the blood that mixed together. Either way, the confusion sets in at the time of zrika. That's when this Bryce picks up. And the Bryce is saying, okay, here's what you do if it's mixed together, if it's individual, here's the blood applications. But I love when I saw it, this is a case where at the time of Shechita, there was ownership clarity. So because there's ownership clarity, whoever needed to do smicha did smicha, and therefore again it's not comparable to our case. Incredible. Rabbi says, so now that we resolved that, so therefore again, halach l'maisa, this braysa is not a contradiction ultimately against what Rabbi Yosef says. We are dealing with the case of karbanos and women's kabbanos in our Mishnah that don't require smicha. Everyone just seizes upon that statement of Rabbi, and what can we say? So we're going to go both say, Rabbi was the one who said that now when you're doing these collective zrikos, so Rabbi said we have to look at the amount of blood that you have. If there's enough of a blood application for this and for this, then ultimately again you're yotze. The Gemara says, now both say, now by the way, how much blood that is not Rabbi what does that mean? Enough for this or enough for this? How much blood exactly does that mean? So obviously the most that we have to go through. So what's been means that Rabbi Haisra is Rabbi really go this way, but kind of what we learned. Rabbi says, Rabbi Ezra, what's the other days? Rabbi says, Hazah Koshevu Mitaharas. So what's that? Here's what's interesting. So Rabbi said as follows. Rabbi says, according to Rabbi Ezra, Hazah, and both say we're switching gears. What's Hazah? Hazah is paraduma. Hazah is like paraduma, right? Which means, again, this is talking about someone is coming. There's only one way to become ritually pure from corpsefulness, and that is to ultimately have them sprinkled upon you. Have them sprinkled upon you. So the Gemara says, Hazah, Koshevu Mitaharas. How much water, how much paraduma water do you need to have sprinkled upon you? Ultimately, again, in order to go ahead and become Taharas, Koshevu, any amount. Look at that for just a moment. First Rashi on 75, he Hazah Koshevu Mitaharas. Chagam Neshigi, Hazah Koshevu Mitaharas, will come on the forest on my front. Hazah Koshevu Mitaharas. Hazah is the most so now, here's the thing to say. The Gemara is presupposing that whatever is true for Hazah is true for Zrika. That's what the Gemara is presupposing. And therefore, halacha l'maisa, with Hazah, the sprinkling of the waters of the Para Aduma doesn't have a share, any amount is going to work. So to halacha l'maisa for Zrika, any amount of blood application is going to work as well. So the Gemara says, with the Hazah in the Tzricha Shir, as the Gemara says, Hazah Nafshakasha, Nafshakasha. So it's a Hazah Kosher Mitaharas. Why? Because Hazah in the Tzricha Shir. Apparently, again, Hazah sprinkling of the water does not require any shear. The Gemara says, Hazah Nafshakasha, Nafshakasha. The Gemara says, if you look at Rashi, Hazah Nafshakasha, Nafshakasha. The Lothim Hazah Kosher Mitaharas. Because in his arbus also elatidu imish hakarobes also shira umekza. In hakarobes also shira mekza, lav dasta eloleka shir dividing the matan tamid. Which the Gemara says, the dvarj of Elazar Kamar, Levi's ima hazal lokot unesim lokot. So I said that Hadanina ultimately was that halacha l'maisa, whenever it applies to Hazal, ultimately again should apply to Zrika as well. Hamash Malon, Ha'izah halachos and Zrika halachos. Two different halachos. Zrika, mainly back to question. Now, both now, again, like I said, this should be back in a couple of days. So now we're going to get to it on pay. Do we pass my Rabbi? Is there actual shear for Zrika or not? That remains ultimately again to be seen. But what comes out clearly is, at least according to Rabbi over here, as according to right now, there may be a difference between Hazah and Zrika. It's possible that again Hazah has no shear. The Haraya again, even if some of the water that gets mixed in may be invalid water, we'll have to see about that. But Allah Zrika may still require a shear. Incredible. All right, let's go back there. This Agul B'Becharu Meiser. So we'll say now we're coming to the end of the Mishnah. The Mishnah that spoke about the idea that if you have a sacrificial, regular animal that gets mixed in with the Char and Meiser. And again, I've also remember again, the Char and Meiser are unique. Why? Because they become the property of the Kohen. Remember again, a Char animal, Meiser animal there are sacrificial parts, but the Meiser ultimately again become the property of the Kohen. So what was the halacha? If you have a regular animal that mixed in with these other animals, you actually stavu. Ultimately, again, you let them graze until they develop a long tree in the Mishnah. And then again, all of the animals are consumed in accordance with the standards of the Char and Meiser. He says, the Gemara, Rabbi Bar Chava, the Char Levei Shama Ein Ma'achilin Lemidas. I would say I just mentioned just my previous Gemara. How beautiful this is. It's the same contemplate that when it comes ultimately again to Zrika, it's possible to made a fundamental difference between Zrika and Hazah. Zrika representing purification on the there. Hazah, the sprinkling of the waters, ultimately again of the party waters on the someone who's coming. And the Gemara just made a tremendous interesting distinction. And it is possible that Zrika needs a shear, but Hazah, any amount, ultimately again affects Kara, purifies. Let's say, what a tremendous lesson. And it could be that, when it comes ultimately again to one's Avodas Hashem, when it comes to service of Hashem, there are rules and regulations. It's a shear, right? So let's say, person goes ahead and says, I'm only going to put on my tefillin shayad. I'm not going to put on my tefillin shayad. So again, it's not the best example because we need to look at that also. But when I say, doesn't work that way. There's a shear. There's a shear. Person says, I'm going to keep these halachas, not those halachas. By the way, we all do that. I'm going to keep these halachas, not those halachas. But again, at least if I do it, I know that it's wrong, and I'm trying to do something better. When it comes to Avodas Hashem, it's a shear. It's a shear. Like, there's no rules. There's things you have to do. So when it comes to Tara, any little bit has the ability to purify. You don't struggle with too much life. You don't struggle with different forms of impurity of thought, impurity of action, impurity of lifestyle. We all have that. It's important to know that sometimes it's even the smallest thing that could rectify impurity in life. It's even the smallest drop that has the ability. Sometimes all I need is a little bit of goodness, a little bit of holiness to rectify the impurities of life. It may only be an episodic rectification, right? It may only be a little bit of a temporary fix. And sometimes all you need is that little bit of that little splash of Paradima water, like that little splash of Tara. And at least in that moment, everything is as it should be. Tara does not necessarily require ongoing comprehensive change. Sometimes all you need is a little bit of that splash of beautiful Paradima Ruchnius, that little splash of inspiration, that little splash of holiness, and at least in that moment, everything is as it should be. You might go like it. When it comes to Abakar, I will say, remember again, what happens with Bakar? The Bakar animal is at the first part of my flock. What do? I give it to the Kohen. Right? Now that belongs to the Kohen. Sacrificial parts offered up on the Messiah, and that ultimately again goes to the Kohen. So what's the halacha? Ein ma'achilin l'nido. A nido can't eat Bakar meat. Right? Because now, again, when the Kohen goes ahead and slaughters it, it's his. But even though it's his, I will say, nevertheless, what? It has a high level of kedusha. Because of that high level of kedusha, a woman who is tmeya because she is in nida, ultimately can consume it. Tmura somehow. What is it tmura? Now, remember again, what's tmura? What's tmura? You have a sacrificial animal and you exchange it for something else. What's halacha when you do that? By Yahu, tmura sapol kashan. Both animals, the original animal and the exchange animal are focused. So now the kohen gets the tmura also. Is a nida allowed to eat from the tmura? Similarly again, bakar inonistat. So ultimately again, a bakar can't be redeemed. Can't be redeemed. Can't redeem a bakar. Tmura somehow. What if again? I will say I'm Yisrael. So now I give it tmura. Can the tmura be redeemed? Bakar inonishka v'lishra tmura somehow. So remember again, has the mishnah. Part of the sanctity of a bakar is that even though it belongs to the kohen, you can't treat it like regular meat, which means you can't check it in a slaughterhouse, right? And you can't weigh it on a scale. Like that's the way like regular meat, that's like transactional meat. You can't do that with bakar meat. What about the tamura of a bakar? Can you go ahead and check it in the slaughterhouse and can you weigh it with a scale? Tell me, Rabbi said, bakar in my sir, Yishuhumu also tamura. With Tmuras and Kiyos Leviim, because this is the right is that bakar animal and nice animal, when they develop a womb, ultimately again you can go ahead and make it Tmura, and the Tmura ultimately has the sanctity of the original animal. So Bayra Racham asked the following Shaila. It is bakar, so we'll say so again. What that sounds like ultimately is that Allah Lamaisa, the Tmura of a bakar has the same status as a bakar. So whatever applies to bakar applies to tmura. So therefore, again, just like a nida can't eat bakar, a nida can't eat tmura. Just like ultimately, again, you can't go ahead and check the bakar in the slaughterhouse or weigh it on the scale. So to the tmura, if we checked it in the slaughterhouse or weigh it on the scale. Okay, incredible. So the next case. So this is very interesting. Let's say a kohen has a bakar animal. All right, the bakar animal, right? So what happens? It develops a mum. Because obviously at that point, when a bakar animal develops a mum, it loses some elements of its bakar sanctity. At that point, the Rabbi says, what do? I pledge that animal to bedek habayis, right? To temple upkeep, which means financial sanctity. So now what's the shaila? Can I measure it on a scale? The Rabbi said, now what's the cap over here? Now, I'm going to end up selling off this meat. Now, it's in the interest of the Beis Hamikdash that I measured on a scale. Why? Because it's more exact. The more exact the measurements are, the more money I can make. Who's making the money? The Beis Hamikdash. So the shaila is normally, we would say, that you cannot go ahead and use the scale for the meat of a bachar animal, right? That's what we just established because that's a lack of sanctity or lack of respect towards the meat. What about here, where the use of the scale is actually for the benefit of the Beis Hamikdash? Is that permitted? So the Moshe Rat, but the hektish of it, do we say that again? Profit to the Beis Hamikdash is more important. Or do we say the Bechar of it? Or do we say
why
no?
don't you do so much teaching today? Well, listen to this. This is interesting.
Well, so we have competing values of
Interesting that
which one do we choose? I'm on this. Let's analyze this. This our group, the Bechar, nice. We'll say,
stranger shit has
on
happened.
Mishnah, is you have a regular animal that
Stranger
gets
things
mixed
have
in
happened.
with Bechar,
Really?
nice animals. What's the what do you do with the Chavra? You actually stab them. You let them graze until they develop a mum. And ultimately, again, then you consume all of the animals. You can consume them, but you have to do so in accordance with the strictures of Meiser and Bechar. To which the Gemara says, doesn't that mean Lav L'mein Ra Te'enu Nishko B'Litra? That obviously means that Allah L'mein, you can't weigh it. You can't weigh it in the normal way. So what do you see from there? And ultimately, again, even once the Bechar animal develops a mum, Allah L'mein still retains elements of its Bechar sanctity. Most notably, you can't weigh it on a scale.
How long is this fucking thing going to take?
Hassam, so in the case of the Mishnah, Shtei Kedushos, Shtei Gufim. Remember again, in the case of the Mishnah, they will say you have 2 Kedushos and 2 Gufim. Now, what does that mean? Remember again, in the case, you have different animals and different Kedushos. In our case, our case, which is the case of the Bechar that becomes blemished, that you went ahead and you gave to the Beis Hamikdash Bedek Habayis ultimately, again, it is Hachash take Kedushos V'Gufechad. In our case over here, it's two Kedushos with one body, right? Because it's one animal. What are the two Kedushos? On one hand, Bachar, on the other hand, Bedek Habayis. So the cases really aren't comparable.
Dude, this creating image bullshit is like back in the day when you have to wait for the internet to be able to show a picture and shit like that.
Imagine if a person would say, so
Kids
I
have
have
no
no
idea
car.
how
Let's go with this case.
good you
I
have
have
it.
a car animal.
This shit in the future will just be like boom, generated images, generated videos, boom, boom, boom,
Imagine
boom.
I came forward and I
Really,
said
to
the
pay for
following. I
credits
said,
and bullshit like that.
I'd
Worst
like
system
to redeem the Bakar.
ever. Dog,
Pledge
come
to
on.
Bedek Habayis. The Gemara says, Klum Shomim Lo. Ultimately, again, would we listen to him? So of course not, because you can't redeem Bakar. You can't redeem it. To which the Gemara says, Rahmana Omar Heftu Lo Sipta. The Torah says you can't redeem it. So both says, so again, the Gemara says,
What is this? What in the fuck?
Klum Hiknezeh Elamasha Kanolo. So both say, so
Dude, that shit takes so
in
long.
general, when you convey
I'll
something,
watch the Chabad video and
only
then
convey that
I'll go.
which you have. In other words, a conveyance, the person who receives a conveyance has no more rights than the conveyor himself. That's the way conveyances work. Say for Rabbi said, the Gemara look at actually just a moment. It's the third of the intermediate wide lines. Fourth, sorry, Kumlekne, Hakoin Zelabedek Habayis, Elamash Kanalov Gufo, but before that, the Haven the Etzlo no Hotel Lishkavalitra, and Yakala Hatnos the Bedek Habayis, all the Tamid Zimsum Ishkalitra. So let's remember again, what was our case? Our case was that the Kohen has a blemished Bakar,
You're
that
done.
he wants to give to the Beis Hamikdash for Bedek Habayis. Now again, remember, when the Kohen has a Bakar, there are certain restrictions in the consumption of that meat. Namely, you can't weigh it on a scale. The Shaila now is when it gives it over to Bedek Habayis, can he have the meat weighed on a scale? Why would you want that? That's the benefit for the Beis Hamikdash. Definitely beneficial for the Beis Hamikdash, ultimately again, to have the meat weighed. So now the Gemara says, Halacha l'maisa over here, Halacha l'maisa. So now, bottom line, what's the halacha? The halacha is it doesn't work. Why doesn't it work? Because the Kohen's conveyance to the Beis Hamikdash can be no greater than his actual rights. And since when the Bakar was his, he wasn't allowed to weigh it, therefore again, even though now he's giving to the Beis Hamikdash, and it's for the benefit of the Beis Hamikdash to weigh it on a scale, ultimately again, even halacha l'maisa, once that Bakar has been given over to the Beis Hamikdash, they cannot weigh it on a scale because the received Bakar can be no stronger than, or I should say, the conveyance ultimately only conveys the rights of the actual Kohen himself, no more, no less. Incredible. Listen, let's finish up. I call you called him in this other. So remember again the Mishnah said, end of the Mishnah. Anything can get mixed together. In other words, the Mishnah says all these cases of mixtures are possible. There's one exception. Puts minachatas va'ash. Chatas and an asham can't get mixed together in a mixture of sacrificial animals.
Picture, John?
Says the Gemara, why not? So mashna chatas va'asham. Why can't the chatas and an asham get mixed together? Well, the Gemara would say on a simple level, the high zachar, the high nikiva. Because ultimately, again, an asham is a male animal, and a nikiva is a chatas. So again, I was like, can't really have a mixture of male and female, no matter how they identify, right? Because l'maisa, again, anatomically, they're going to be distinct. So because they are distinct, therefore, halacha l'maisa, again, there's no mixture. To which the Gemara says, 1 second, chatas va'olanani. But then you make the same argument to the chatas and an ola. Why? Well, is that because the chatas ultimately is always a female animal, and an ola is a zach. So again, I can make the same argument over here. The Gemara says, no, there is an exception to this. Why? Ika seir nasi. Ultimately, the Gemara says there is the seir of the nasi, right? Which ultimately, again, is a chatas offering, but halacha l'maisa is a zachar. So the Gemara says, "Hi seir v'hai temer." Sorry, hi seir v'hai temer. But I say there is a different ultimately again between a goat and the sheep. So apparently, again, one has hair and one has wool. A goat has seir. Ultimately, again, a sheep has wool. So I guess those who know. Right? So let's say, so again, there'll be a distinction between those two as well. I Pesach va'asham nami lo na'arev. So again, you can make the same argument. A Pesach, cover Pesach, and an asham also wouldn't be able to get mixed together. Why not? High ben shana, the high ben station. There's different ages. A Korban Pesach has to be an animal within 1 year, versus ultimately again an asham which is 2 years. Which the Gemara says, "Ika asham nazir asham mitzora." First of all, again, I will say there are other type of asham like asham nazir, asham mitzora, that ultimately again are animals that are within 1 year. By saying the other possibility is Ika ben shana de mechse ke ben shtei shanim, the Ika ben shtayim de mechse ke ben shana. Here's the difference also. When you have animals of the same type, ultimately, again, but different ages, that's not necessarily a distinguishable thing. Because they will say sometimes you can have an animal that is 1 year old that looks like 2, and sometimes you can have an animal that is 2 years old that looks like 1. They will say a profound Musar Haskell, right? That when it comes to living beings, sometimes you can have something that is young that acts incredibly mature. Sometimes you can have something that is mature that acts incredibly young. And I will say this is important for us because this is a good chizuk. Biological age need not be a determinant for our ability to succeed in life. A person could be young and ultimately, again, not have a lot of life experience, but could have the wisdom to attach, like Rabbi could have the wisdom ultimately, again, to attach himself to people who have more life experience and therefore live the life of someone a little bit more seasoned. On the other hand, sometimes the person could be older, but yet still repeat the same mistakes of youth over and over and over. So much of life, we'd love to say that life is about not making mistakes. That's impossible. Everyone makes mistakes. So what's life about? Life is about not making the same mistakes over and over and over. The goal in life is don't be a 2-year-old who looks like a 1-year-old. Right? Don't go or behaves like a 1-year-old. Don't be someone who is mature. Don't be someone who is biologically advanced, who is still making the same exact mistakes as he did when he was young. To make no mistakes is impossible, but at least to learn from our mistakes, to try to do better, to try to do different. Well, I'm not making different mistakes, but at least if we're not repeating the same ones, right? As long as I'm not a 2-year-old acting like a 1-year-old, then ultimately, again, that is a life well lived, a life well led. I want to say, great run today. Shkoyach, everyone. All right. We caught up with the rest of Klal Yisrael by Shabbos. Shkoyach. Good Shabbos, everyone. Kev on Zoom. Have a great Shabbos.
We'll do this tomorrow. We'll go into a fucking
Yeah.
Are you done? This thing's still not done.
Gotta get in this week's newsletter. Good morning, everybody. Today's daf is Ayin Vav. We are going to pick up on the bottom of Ayin Ham and Bays. We've got until the Gemara. Just a quick review of the Mishnah. The Mishnah brought down a machlokas. If you have an asham and a shlamim that get mixed together, Rabbi Shimon says that you bring both the kavanos and you bring it with the chumras of each. So you have to bring them both in the north, and they're limited in their eating time. And the Rabbanan argued on that and said we don't do that because we don't want to take the less stringent carbon and apply additional stringencies to it, because we're worried about the principle of Emivin Kachim Vesapsul, by limiting the time or certain other aspects of the carbon. You're potentially bringing that carbon to be disqualified if, again, you miss the time of eating or it's not brought in the proper place. And so the Rabbanan say we don't, instead of taking the chumras of both, we just have both the carbonos grazed until they get a mum, and then we redeem them that way. So Gemara is going to discuss this concept of how do we apply this concept of, or how widely does Rabbi Shimon not apply his concept. He's not worried about bringing carbonos, limiting their time frame, and potentially bringing carbonos to a psul. So pick up in the Gemara. Tani Tana Kame the Rav. So they brought a brisa in front of Rav. It said, Shvius, if you have Perosh Shvius, ein lochem b'dameha shruma, neshmematin b'achilasa. So if you have Perosh Shvius, you redeem them onto coins, you can't go and take that money and buy shruma. Why? Because when you redeem the Shvius onto the money now has Kedusha Shvius. You go ahead and you buy truma, you are going to be limiting the ability to eat that truma. Why? Because Shvius, look in Rashi 2 lines from the bottom. Why? So because Shvius, the time for eating Shvius is limited, you can only eat the produce of Shemitah when that particular min is still available out in the field. And so when you now infuse this truma that you're buying with the kedusha of Shvius, this truma has to be eaten by that certain time. While truma, Rashi continues, truma, when it's not from the Shemitah year, there's no truma in the Shemitah year. So there's no limiting factor. Truma can technically, as long as it lasts, can be eaten forever. And so if we go ahead and we purchase truma with this Shvius money, what we're doing is limiting the ability to eat that truma and potentially bringing that truma the day psul that if it goes past the time, that truma now needs to be destroyed. That's the brisa. So Amruha, back in the Gemara. So Amruha Rabbana Kame Rabba. He said this in front of Rabba. And he said, Loka Rabbi Shimon. This brisa must not be like Rabbi Shimon from our Mishnah. Why? Rabbi Shimon Amar may be in Kajin the base of Sul. Rabbi Shimon did not have an issue with this. Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah said that if the two karbanos get mixed together, you can go ahead and offer them with the chumras of each, and therefore limiting the time for eating of one of the karbanos. And Rabbi Shimon did not have a problem with it. So Rabbi said back to them, no, I feel tame Rabbi Shimon. This brisa could still follow the opinion of Rabbi Shimon in our Mishnah. Hani be like the Eved, the Chatfila because perhaps when Rabbi Shimon said his position in the Mishnah, that was only with the Eved, meaning the karbanos were already mixed together, and then we're figuring out what we can do with them. But this case of Shvius, of Shemitah money, is a case of lechatchila. We're actively going and taking the money that has kedusha Shvius and going ahead and purchasing truma, and therefore actively limiting the time to eat the truma. It's not a case where the mixture has already happened. So maybe Rabbi Shimon's position only works in a case where the mixture has already taken place, and now you're figuring out what to do, as opposed to actively going with lechatchila and limiting the time for eating the kachri. No proof from there. So comes along the Gemara and asks, and is it true that Rabbi Shimon only would apply his position, that he's not worried about Mevi'in kachri l'veisul only in a case of the diavad and not lechatchila? Abai comes and is going to ask a series of questions where it seems that Rabbi Shimon would apply his principle no matter whether it's the diavad or lechatchila. Is Abai top of Ayin Vav Amid Al. Kulon Rishon Kohanim the Shanos Ba'achilasam. So this is a mission from later on in the Masechta. It's talking about how the Kohanim eat their various types of kachim. And the Mishnah tells us, in all cases, Kohanim are allowed to eat these karbanos in different ways. Whether lachlan spuyim, whether they want to roast them, shlukim, to overcook them, shalom regular cook, and that's the key for us. They can put on the Kohanim can put on spices that are just regular fluid spices, or even put on truma spices. Divrei Rabbi Shimon, So we see we're talking about truma spices. What happens if you're adding truma spices onto these spices? You are effectively limiting the time to eat the truma, just like we had before, right? The spices that are truma could be eaten for as long as they last. If you add them to a carbon, now you're limiting the time that you can eat those spices. And it seems that you're putting it on the chatila. So it seems that Rabbi Shimon is holding his position that he's not worried about limiting the ability to eat truma even in a case of the Bakila. Amalei, so it's exactly by no Hana Trumas Tavla Drabanan. This is can't bring people here because here we're talking about Truma of spices, and spices would only be Truma Drabanan. Midoraisa, Truma is limited to grapes, olives, and the 5 grapes. So here we're talking about spices, we're not talking about Truma Drabanan. So maybe again we wouldn't be worried about this principle of anything being kosher or we wouldn't be worried about that in a case of Truma Derabanan, but we may still, maybe Rabbi Shimon still would be worried about it in a case of Truma Deraisa. Okay? So, Abai comes to another question. Ein lochin Truma to Kesef Meiser, Nishimai Bachi Lassan. So, now this case is talking about mixing, or sorry, not mixing, but purchasing Truma with the Kesef of Meiser Sheni. And what's the issue there? Rashi implementation of my Bachilasan, the Makom Achilasan. And the issue is if you use Meiser Sheni money to whatever you buy it, maybe it's and otherwise, Truma could be used. Anyway, again, you're now limiting what you can do with that Truma, and potentially, if that Truma is now moved outside of Yerushalayim, it can't be eaten. You can again bring it to become a that's not a comment in this. But Rabbi Shimon in the Mishnah, Rabbi Shimon comes along and is not here. So we see here clearly in the case of Lechatila, you're taking your money that was infused with spices and you're going ahead and purchasing Truma with it, which then limits the potential of eating the Truma because you can now only eat it in Yerushalayim. And we see in Tanakh says that's a problem because he holds like the Rabbanan that Ava being touched with they eat it too. Rabbi Shimon comes along and says it's okay. So we see Rabbi Shimon applies his opinion in a case where it is Daraisa and it is Lechatila. So Rabbi Shimon's opinion in the Mishnah is a little bit more far-reaching than we may have thought. And basically, so Rabbi was quiet and he accepted Abaye's question and agreed that Rabbi Shimon's opinion would apply even in the case of the Lechatila. So when Abai then went and was referring to Yosef, so even though Abai asked a big question on Rava, Yosef wants to know, why did you ask from a different place? But about a couple questions on Rava's opinion. And that's this. Let's say we have a case where you want to cook a vegetable that is a sweet vegetable, and you want to use oil that is Truma oil. And again, what's the issue? Again, what the issue is, if you're taking the Truma oil and using it to cook a vegetable that is Truma, so then you're again taking that oil that was otherwise Truma can be eaten, for any time period, and now limiting it to being intertwined with the shmita, and it can only be eaten at the same time that vegetable is still out in the field. So again, just like we had before, it's a case where you're going ahead and limiting the availability to eat the shuma, and Tanakh says you can't do that. Rabbi Shimon comes along and says it's okay. So again, this could be another question that Abaye could have asked on Rabbi. Amarlai Abaye says to Yosef, Abaye, didn't I already ask Rava from the case of the spices of putting Truma spice on Kashim? And the issue was, Amarli, honestly, Truma's tablet. Because Rabbi says, because Rabbi said that the Truma spices are only Truma Derabanan. It's not one of the D'Oraisa Truma levels, and that's why there was no, that wasn't a valid question on Rabbi's opinion. Lachanami, Truma's Yach Derabanan. Also, why don't we say the same thing? This oil, this Truma oil, must be made from some vegetable that isn't subject to, it's not olive oil, which would be subject to Truma Deraisa. It's some other type of oil, which is only Truma Derabanan, and therefore I didn't ask this question, because I already was plugged up when I asked a different question relating to Truma that was Derabanan. So Yosef says that, if that's the case, that we're talking about oil that's not olive oil, but rather some other vegetable oil that's only a Derabanan, then his Mishnah should have taught us this case in the opposite way. What's the opposite way? Yerek shel truma should be the case of the vegetable being truma, the shemen shel shvius, and the oil would be shvius. Why? Look at the Rashi. It's about 7 lines down where it gets in. Should have said Edim Yavashtim Yerek Shal Truma B'Shem Shvius. Rabbi Shimon Matir and Rabbi Shimon would be not in that case. Right? Aval Pashta Shemen Truma D'Oraisa. Rather, if it switched it around, it specifically said that the Shemen is the Truma and the Yerek is the Shvius. It must be that it's because we're talking about Truma D'Oraisa. Why? Because oil has the possibility of being olive oil, which would be Truma D'Oraisa, or vegetable oil, which would be Truma D'Rabbanan. But if it just said the vegetables were of Truma and the oil was of Shvius, so all vegetables are Truma D'Rabbanan. So the point to teach us that would have been the more concise way to teach Brisa. And the fact that we instead said the oil is what is Truma and the vegetables are what Shvius, it must be that we're talking about olive oil, which is D'Oraisa, so therefore it would be, this would still could have been a good question on Rabbi. So Yosef says back. Rabbi says back to say why he didn't use this as his line of questioning. The law of me and speaking Ratison in Matir Rabbi Shimon. Amali the Orev Achanai the other. So Rabbi says, didn't I also when the question that I asked the initial question that I asked on Rabbi, the answer was given was I was talking about a case where the mixture was already in existence. We're talking about a case of the other. We wouldn't have two going ahead and mixing it. Instead, it was a case of something was already mixed. So why don't we say in this Mishnah the oil of truma and the vegetable of shvius, and it's already a case where they mix together. So the oil is already infused, and you're just going ahead and cooking it afterwards, but you already encountered a situation where the two are already mixed. So if that's the case, it wouldn't be a good question. So this is back up. If we're talking about a case here where the mixture was already in existence, so why would the Rabbanan have their position, right? In this Mishnah, the Rabbanan said you are not allowed to go ahead and cook it. If it was a case where they encountered the mixture already in existence, why wouldn't the Rabba? What's the reason behind the Rabbanan's position? Why would they prohibit going ahead and cooking that vegetable that's soaked in the truma oil, the shvius vegetable soaked in the truma oil? So what is Yosef answer? No, we did have a Ashim Shlomen. No, it's just like the case in our Mishnah, right? We started this whole case in our Mishnah where we had Ashim and Shlomen mixing together, and in that case as well, the Rabbanan said you cannot go ahead and chef them with the stones of both, but rather you let them raise and get a month. It's the same thing here. We don't we compare to that case, we already have the mixture in existence. We're not going to let you go ahead and cook it and really infuse those two together and limit the truma. So, by step, we dummy. Also, just like that concept, the case we had in the Mishnah, there was another alternative. Rather than shafting the two karbanos and limiting one of them, you could go ahead and let them both raise, and then you can limit the other. There was a second alternative. So the Rabbanan said, because we have another option, we're not going to go ahead and let you limit, go ahead with the principle of Amidin Kachim. But however, here, that's like the concept. In this case, you have the vegetable oil and the vegetable mixed together. There's no other alternative to be able to take them apart or to figure out what to do with this mixture. Because like Abai says, no, hello dummy. This is not comparable to the first case of the Mishnah, where we had a live animal, Asham and Asham and plum mixed together. So rather, this is comparable to the second case of the Mishnah, which was the Satifa. You had already checked this piece of meat that were mixed together. So you couldn't go ahead and do anything else. The meat was already there and done. And so in that case, it came into less like Katanja or Punisher ahead. So there, in that case, the Rabbanan agreed that you can go ahead and use treat it with the things in the day. So in this case, the same thing. When you have a mixture that's already infused, there isn't another option to be able to separate them. So they're here together. So Rabbanan would say you can go ahead, you would agree to Rabbi Shimon, you can go ahead and cook them together. Rabbi asked, "We dummy chatichos to the chatikos, plus they takhan to cut." The case of the Mishnah, the second case of the Mishnah in the Sefer was two pieces of meat. There really is nothing else to do. Either you go to waste or you eat them with the chumrah, with the chumrah of the two of them. But here, in our case of the oil, the sweet and vegetable, the sweet and oil of truma, here's the kind of the skita. Why don't we wring out the vegetable, squeeze out all those oils, and therefore we're taking the mixture apart basically. And so why don't the Rabbanan say we should do that instead of going ahead and allowing the cook? That's the opinion of that's the advice. We're going to say taking this question. What does the Yossi say to that? He says no. How exactly would you go ahead and do this pressure squeezing? This kuva, if you go ahead and you really have to squeeze hard to make sure you get every little bit of the truma oil out from the sweet vegetable, a massive shvius. Then we're going to have an issue. You're going to be ruining some of the shvius. Inevitably, so you're crushing the vegetable and get all the oil out. Some of it's going to ruin and dissipate. So you're not going to be able to do that because you have to treat the vegetable of its proper pizza. So okay, so find this for puta. So then what's the just do another squeeze? And then so you will be married. You're not going to be able to fully get all of the oil out unless you do a really hard squeeze. So according to that side, we should my focus, I guess, in the Messias of whether it is possible to properly. Rabbi held that you could, and therefore it wasn't. He didn't use this to ask the question on Rabbi because it was different than the case that we have. Okay, so I guess now after Yosef is coming and asked Rabbi why he didn't have some of these other questions on Rabbi, I guess Rabbi had a couple different other questions that he could have asked on Rabbi Shita. Again, to see how far Rabbi Shimon would apply his dinner. He's not worried about him being kosher based on shul, and he would allow active measures to limit truma or other kosher as long as there's a mixture. As long as you are satisfied with the traumas of what you're teaching that are mixing up. So, Shimon Omer. So I asked the following question on Rabbi Shimon Omer, and here we're talking about, look, in Rashi L'Macharas, talking about the Safek Mitzvah, talking about somebody who, Safek Mitzvah Mukhot, Safek Mukhot. They had some blemish on their skin, and they came to Zoin, and they were put away for 7 days, and it's a suffix whether they were just set aside for the 7 days, but never actually became a full-fledged mitzvah, and therefore they're coming out at the end of their time, they're done, or if they actually were, they actually became a full-fledged mitzvah, in which case they have to go through the tahara process. So they're not sitting on the cusp of the 8th day, which would be when they bring their karbanos. And Shimon Omer L'Macharas, back in the Gemara, the last line, L'Macharas on the 8th day, maybe Ashamo Lubalina. So this person who's a Safek full-fledged Mitzorah, and a Safek maybe just someone who's locked up as a potential Mitzorah and is not getting out, they have to go, if they were a full-fledged Mitzorah, they would have to bring Karban Hasham and a lug of oil on the 8th day. So now the 8th day comes, what do? They bring an asham and the oil, roll it, and they make it smash. Say, in Sham Mitzorah, if this person actually was Mitzorah, so this asham is a real asham of Asham Mitzorah, or is the asham is a lugo, then this kava is a required asham, and the lug of shaman is the required lug. On our days, I love them days. The in-laws, if however this person is not an actual Mitzorah, but just was locked up as a potential Mitzorah, is not getting out, and therefore does not need to actually bring the Karban Hasham or the Lug Shaman. So then, Hasham Dress, Shalman Nedava. Then this Hasham is being brought, it's just being brought as a non-required carbon, and therefore, what do you do with that? What do you now have to do with that carbon? Right? It might be an asham mitzvah, and it might just be the dava. So, what do the kohanim do with it? So asham comes shita, it's safon. So it has to have shita the safon, which is the chomer of the asham. So you treat like the asham and slaughtered in the north. But also, but also has other stringencies. It also has the stringencies of the Nedava. It has to be some from the Mitzora, where it has to be placed on the thumbs. And you have to do proper smicha, and you have to do with it. You have to do the choke, and also it's limited in the time of eating for only 1 day and 1 night. So again, we have a situation now where the korban is being brought. It might be a full-fledged Mitzora. It might just be a Nedava, and therefore we have to chef this korban and follow the stringencies of both. But what do we see here? We see this again. There's literacy being focused in this Mishnah, and we see this Mishnah that one is allowed to bring this korban, even though this animal is now going to have. You're going to be potentially winning, right? Actually, in this case, it's either way. Whether it's Asham Sora or an Asham Nedava, you're taking certain stringencies for each. So what you're doing it is actually taking a korban that is either an Asham or an Nedava and infusing it with additional stringencies. And so that seems to be going against our Mishnah, which said, A, Megin Hachim, today is Hapsul. So what would you do? How does this Mishnah fit in? How does this Mishnah fit in with the coach of our Mishnah? That says we're not allowed to go ahead and check these animals in a way that would limit what their availability is for eating and certain things that have to be done with it. Gemara comes to answers. 4 lines from the bottom, from the top, on the base. This case is different. Why? We have a person who's really sitting in limbo. And what's the option? This person might be a full-fledged Sarah and might not be a full-fledged Sarah. So you have to give him some option to be able to become Tahar or move out of his state of suffering. So if we would apply the principle that we are not allowed to limit this korban in any different way that's not required, you're going to put this person just in a constant state of limbo. You would never be able to get out of their protection of status. So because we have a person that needs some resolution, so therefore the Rabbanan would relax their first of all, and in this case allow you to bring this korban with stringencies of Nedava and of a Asham Mitzvah. So now the Gemara goes a little bit on a tangent once we brought down this case. So we talked about what we do with the Asham. We're now going to discuss what would happen or what are the parameters of this logo Shemin that also needs to be brought. Because again, if this person is a real Mitzvah, then they also have to bring a logo Shemin as part of their korban. And if this person is not, then the logo Shemin is obviously not necessary. So 4 lines down. So fine. We now worked out what you need to do with that Asham korban and how you properly check it with the stringencies of both. What do you do with this logo Shemin? So the Amar, so the Amar simply says, you take the logo and you say, if this person is not a Mitzvah, then they're bringing the logo Shemin just as again as the Nedava. So the Gemara asks, okay, that makes sense. So if the person is not Mitzvah, the logo Shemin is fine. It's part of the process. But if not, and now the logo Shemin is brought to the Nedava has different requirements. You have to do Lisa on the logo Shemin because the logo Shemin has the same requirements as was learned from the korban mincha, which the korban needs to take, right? The korban take a piece of the mincha offering off and burn it. The same thing, if you bring an oil that's a Nedava, you have to take some of the oil off as the pizza. So you have to follow that parameter as well. So what do I say? Not good. Okay, so you take the pizza. All right, well that's not so simple. But Dilma, Mitzorahu, you buy matan sheva. But okay, so that's fine if it's you're talking about in Nedava. But what if it's a logo Shemin from Mitzvah, then it also needs to have the seven sprinkling. So be like, okay, no, should we do the 7 sprinkling as well? All right, well then that creates an issue about Chatzar light. But now we have another problem. If you go ahead and you take the 7 sprinkles from that oil, now your oil is sufficient. It's sufficient from what you had before. Let's see Rashi.
That while he was in the precept, that he was yelling, screaming, and tearing the place up. I didn't do it.
Fine. Either way, you're taking off. Well, when you do the spring, you're taking off from that oil. Now your carbon is short. What do we say? My support to Maui. So now we go ahead and we add more oil back on. So we fill it back up. We do the sprinklings and we fill it back up to the appropriate level. It's not. If right, because if we, in the case of the Dava, after we take the comets, we have some deficiencies in the oil. What we do is we add more oil into it. So we're allowed to do that. So we're trying to figure out a way where we can take this local oil and treat it both for the soda that is needed and for the Dava. Okay. So now the Gemara has another question. So we're about 8 people that are on okay, but now we took up the tweets, all right, because if this was a Nadava, that this logo is being brought, then we said you have to take a piece of the oil off of it. And now we have to, just taking off the oil enough, we have to go ahead and burn it. Okay, Dr. Ray, so you go ahead and burn it. So Gemara asks Amos, all right, well now is where the issue comes up. When exactly are we going to burn the pizza that we took from this loaf? If you go ahead and you want to burn the pizza after you've already done 7 applications, now we have an issue. Now we have an issue because we have a principle that if between taking the pizza and burning the pizza, some of your leftover, some of your shirayim is removed, the principle is you're no longer allowed to go ahead and burn that pizza. All the shirayim has to stay intact until after the pizza is burned. And if we take the pizza, we take the bit of oil, then we go ahead and do the 7 applications. We've now reduced it, taken off of the shirayim. We can't go ahead and burn the pizza anymore. Okay, so that's not going to work. We can't go ahead and burn it afterwards. So rather, what's the other option? Instead, let's say, all right, let's go ahead and take the pizza, burn it, and then want to do the 7 applications. Okay, so that was a problem. Now we have another issue. Already worked out Sakir. Another principle called Kosher Menu Ishim. Already with Sakir. Let's see. That we'll see in Rashi. And Rashi is second wide line Rashi. So like we said, now what we're doing is we're going to burn the pizza before we go ahead and take the 7 applications for the set. Anything about Sina Mesa, assuming that. But on Shep, right? How once we've gone ahead and burned the pizza, how can we then go ahead and take the Sheva? Why? Tilma Nidavahi. Perhaps this log is actually a Nidava. Daktarza Kome is Haktara, and then the burning of the pizza is actually required and necessary. And now we're left with the shirayim of the oil after the burning of the pizza. Another ma'ayil, then the issue is when you take off from that remaining oil, we have an issue about the kilo, right? He's a kosher sharing the club, not for a bunch of the comments came up as within time. We say it applies, more widespread to different types of korbanos. The Hanach Hazot, that's the Kila and Rashi. These Hazot of the Minnesota are a form of avoda. And once we take it and burn the korbanos and have shirayim, those shirayim cannot go ahead and be used to perform another avoda. They can be used as their regular shirayim. But once the pizza is burned, you can't go ahead and do an avoda. And if go ahead and you do the sprinkling for the Mitzvah, you're then taking these and doing an avoda with them after the pizza has already been brought, and that's going to be an issue of being over on this kosher menu ishim. And so we're now stuck. What are we going to do with this? When we're going to have to burn the pizza from the logo Shabbat? Because either way, we're having issues working it out, right? We can't do it after because of the issue of kosher menu ishim, and we couldn't do it before because then we have an issue where you take the pizza, you can't have any removal of the shirayim before you go ahead and burn the pizza. So the issue is what do we do? Amar Rabbi Yehuda, we're 4 lines from the bottom of the Gemara. Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Rabbi Shimon Hazi, Masik Lahu, Shem. So here is the the pshara. You go ahead and make a t'nai when you are when you're bringing. So let's do that. Rashi the shaving. Dalmar, this is what you say. Dalmar if this is actually a mitzvah, and therefore the burning of the meats is really nothing because there was a mitzvah that says meats is only required if the load was a mitzvah, but not required if it's a load from the mitzvah. Then we don't have a problem because you're taking it from you're doing the hazos from the oil, and there's no issue of shirai because there was no real comments because it was a mitzvah. If it's a case where we're not going to write a mitzvah, and rather it's a load, the load is a mitzvah, and then therefore the burning of the comments actually is something official and is a real burning of the comments. It's and so we would have an issue if we did the sprinklings afterwards. We were worried about the problem of yeshim and elisha, again of taking the shirayim and using them for an avodah. So then you make a t'nai. When you do the sprinklings of Yitzorah, you say if this is actually Mitzorah and these are Mitzorah sprinklings, no problem. If this is really a load that's a Midava, then these sprinklings are not an actual avodah. It's just like sprinkling of water. And because you're saying that it's not a avodah, we don't have an issue of taking shirayim and using them for a further avodah. Tanya back in the Gemara, the last second to last line.
That's my best guess.
Tanya, and that's Omer. The reach nichoach, the atamala, havalamala, the shame. You said the only issue of bringing the shirayim back onto the stuff is really avodah is if it's an actual avodah the reach nichoach for purposes of being an avodah. But if it's something that's just the shenitzim, like they're burning for the water, something that's not an avodah purpose, you don't have an issue of using the shirayim. So that's the pshara. That's what we do in this case. We take the comments and burn it right away, and then we go ahead and do the hazos. We do it with a t'nai that if we were doing it, if this actual load is brought because it's a mitzvah, then these are true sprinklings, and it's not a problem because there wasn't really an actual mitzvah, so that we don't have to miss it that way. And if this was really a load that's in a dava, then these sprinklings are nothing to do with any avodah because there's no actual mitzvah, and it's just sprinkling of water on the fat, and that's how we're able to figure out what to do in this case with the load that is blessed.
Dismissing it. No, the murderer is going to go free.
We are now on the top of Hayin Zayin Hamid Al. Okay, so we're still. So, all right, I guess we're not. I apologize. We're not fully out of the woods. We thought we figured out the logo. We're not fully out of the woods. So, Shirayim, we have another issue. Shirayim, if you remember back, what did we say? We said that when we take we take off the tomat, we go ahead and we burn it. Then we go ahead and do the sheva hazal for the tzara. And the Gemara had asked on other days, and it asked, well, now you're deficient in the shirayim, right? Because you did the sprinkling, so you've lost some of the oil. And what did it say? Okay, add more oil back. All right, great. Well, what's the issue? That oil just added back. We never took pizza. So we filled in the amount, but the pizza was already taken from the original oil. Now we have some shirayim or some additional oil that was added in that did not have pizza taken from it. And if we're in a situation where this load is a mitzvah, not a logo of a mitzvah, you need to have pizza, take it from that, or either that, or you have now something mixed in with already proper Yadava oil that has pizza taken from it, and now you have other oil that's mixed in. That doesn't work. So what do you do? You say the Torah. Or you go ahead and you are
execute that person.
Hold that additional piece of oil. Let's see, that Rashi is 7 lines down where Rashi gets in the Parashlay. Oh, what do you say? If Eno Mitzorah, if this is not a logo of Mitzorah, and we're stuck with this question where we have Shirayim that was, not Shirayim, but an additional oil that was added in to refill to our previous level. So what do you say? Omer, Im Eno Mitzorah, in the dava, and therefore what I put back on that was not needed, then it is put onto this oil. And therefore, that's the get out of it where I posed that action. All right, so the Gemara asks, when exactly are we going to go ahead and do this Regina? Or, sorry, not when, but where? Where are you going ahead and do this Regina? If you're going to do it when you're still inside of this stuff, then a mile flu Lazar. Well, now we have an issue because now the Kohen has now brought Chulin into Lazar because it was previously been added in. It was part of our mixture of kedusha. But now when we are loaded it onto something else, you now have this Chulin oil that's now mixed in. That's inside the stuff. That's what we're bringing Chulin into Lazar. Yeah, right. Okay, fine. So let's take the whole thing out and do it outside. Well, that's a problem because right is the Leviotze. Then the entire lug is a problem because the lug has this kachim. We bring it outside of this mikdash to do the playground. So it's great. That worked for the little sliver that we added. And now the entire lug is a problem because we just brought kachim outside of this mikdash. So where exactly are we doing this hijab? So the Gemara answers the olam. Right? Now really do it on the inside when you're inside this mikdash. And here's the way we get around it. You were worried that you're bringing a problem of bringing fluid inside the mikdash, but what you have to understand is this is not actively going to bring any fluid. The issue is we take fluid and actually transport it and bring it inside. What happened here? When it was added inside, it was fine. It was part of the mixture. You went ahead and were poded. When you were poded, it became fluid while it was already inside this mixture. It wasn't fluid that was brought in, but rather it was already inside. Then it became fluid. So it's not an active bringing fluid in, which is the issue, but instead it is something that transformed itself or is transformed into fluid while already inside the mikdash. And that's not going to be a problem of actually bringing fluid inside the mikdash. But
this is like I'm past tears at this point. I'm more like we just gotta keep going and keep fighting. I mean, you get these little victories here and there. Like we've had a few releases recently that were super encouraging, where you're able to get people a second chance, where you're able to, get it to the point where they could, even though they didn't do it, plead guilty. We just had a release.
All right, I will say good morning, a great Baruch Hashem to be able to continue in the Sefes Tzvachim today. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's shir. A number of them. We thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev. Allison Adam Steinmetz, memory of Adam's grandfather, Rabbi Sheldon Steinmetz, Rabbi Shlomo Tzvi Ruben Ben Shimon Zichron Livracha. The oath of merit of our Talmud Torah is Nishama Havan Ali will be a male with for his children, his grandchildren, and his 34 great-grandchildren. Semi Malka Esterson for dedicating all the shirim and drashos this month in memory of their parents, Yitzchak Leib Ben Aaron HaKohen, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram, Hinda Bas Henach Ephraim, and the memory of their dear family friends, Staff Sergeant Naftali Yonah Gordon and Shemi Kol Damo, who fell in battle in Gaza and Hanukkah in 2023. Always happy for dedicating the Shulman Joshua this month in memory of Paul's family, Leah Bas Shmuel, Zachary Shulamis Bas Shmuel, and Esther Bas Zachariah. Our week of learning sponsors, Barry and Rachel and Rita Rubin, in honor of the chassan of their children, Sophie Tizari Granat, and Shizok Emerson Gadol, Binyan and the Advise them and the Israel Neva Esim Shani Tovos. And our Dafyomi sponsors for today, Ayala and Sarah Steinberg, and the Schus of continued Resborah Shulamis Hana Bas Susha, and for an ongoing refuah. I'd like to welcome back to our Bishop Kozlovsky, who is also dedicating the daf today. It is a longer dedication, which I'll post on the chat. Baruch Hashem, Bishop just returned from an inspirational trip to Eretz Yisrael, Poland, and Lithuania, where he was over Baruch Hashem to see many of the incredible former centers of Torah study. And again, he was over to be in the Yeshivas Tachnei Lublin, established by Ramir Shapira, decided to publish the bracha. Because of the Ravina Rav's foresight, we, together with countless Jews, are Zocha to learn definitely. So welcome back, Baruch Hashem, to Baruch Tishon, and a beautiful and beautiful, I'm sure was an uplifting, incredible trip. Thank you for the beautiful sponsorship. For those that we got, let us begin. So today's daf is Ayat Dalit. We are picking up the Ner Chashad We are picking up actually Ayin Gimel. So today's daf is 974. We're going to pick up Ayin Gimel on days 73b, and we are picking up pretty much the middle of the daf. We actually read this yesterday. Pick up the targets 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 13 lines up from the bottom on 73b. Shava says as follows. Hashtag Amr Rabban Lo Nakriv. So I'm saying, sorry, one additional point that's important to highlight. First of all, happy Thanksgiving to everyone. And it is incredibly important for us. You know, I think Jews in general always, and especially from Jews, always struggle a little bit kind of like what to do with American holidays. Obviously, holidays that have a religious overtone, that's not necessarily for us. But certainly at Thanksgiving, it is so incredibly important. You know, obviously different families have different traditions. You know, so Rabbi used to end shear early on Thanksgiving, so as to allow people to go ahead and be home with their families. And it wasn't because necessarily he ascribed a religious significance to Thanksgiving, but it was simply because people are off. Families hopefully try to get together, and that's beautiful, and that's incredible. But particularly, I think we also on that a day that is dedicated to gratitude, a day that is dedicated to Thanksgiving, and a lot has come just from the confluence of events. This week's Parashah Vayetze, the birth of Leah Yehuda's fourth son Yehuda, where she says, "Hakam Olga Es Hashem." This time, all things that Kadosh Baruch Hu, and incredibly enough, you know, the Shwab, Rafa says, "I don't know what's the shot. This country thanks Hashem. This time for the other, she had 3 sons before. She didn't thank Hashem beforehand." Shwab says something beautiful. She says that Leah Yehuda discovered something new, which was all of us thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for like miraculous events in life. We all thank Hashem for the things that are out of the ordinary. Sometimes what we fail to thank HaKadosh Baruch Hu for are just the great things, the beautiful things that happen every single day. Just the things that we take for granted. We say in Modin every day, Modin, which is the bracha of Thanksgiving, we say, Amisecha Shabachol Yom Imanu. Thank Hashem for the miracles that He does for us every single day. What are the miracles that happen for us every day? You know, you go like this with your hands. That's I don't know, you keep the doctors in the crowd, the synapses, but just like, but everything works. If you woke up and like the sun's out and Baruch Hashem, and hopefully your family is intact, and hopefully there's food in the refrigerator, and maybe there's not as much money as you would like in the bank, right? But to pay your bills, hopefully, right, that you can meet their expenses, maybe you can't do everything. But when I say, hey, you know, most of the world doesn't have that. Most of the world does not have the things that we all have day in and day out. That's on the Shabbat of Holy Month. And the truth is, it's important for us to celebrate Thanksgiving. Not go with the turkey. Right. But you know, it's a creation of HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You can't hate anything, right? But it doesn't need necessarily the cultural trappings. You can do yes or no. But every year should have a Thanksgiving. Every year should have Thanksgiving. So you'll say to yourself, but I don't need to give God today. The truth is that's fine. But generally, it's kind of like people who say, I don't celebrate Mother's Day because every day is Mother's Day. Yeah, right. I'm sure you're calling your mother every day, telling her how wonderful she was. Thank you for being in this world. That's not true. Or just celebrate Mother's Day because you're not focused on it that day, you're not doing it any other day. Thanksgiving is the same thing. You know, say just take out and we're off from work. You're all off from work. Right? But for myself, like, to take a day where maybe you're free from other responsibilities, and literally just take a few moments and just say, what am I grateful for? Like, what am I thanksgiving for? Whether you do that by yourself, you do it with your mishpacha, you do it with your children, you don't let your parents live with your parents. Just to take a few minutes today, I'm Ognes Hashem. The world, at least if our country is giving Thanksgiving for this country for so many other incredible things. We have to take Thanksgiving as well. And the truth is, the Jews of this country as well, with everything that is going on and all of the craziness that we see around us, we must have incredible hakaras Hashem to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. And although we are in Galus, that this is the Galus that we're in. Thanksgiving to the men and women of the armed forces. Thanksgiving again to those who have worked so hard to build this country into a bastion of freedom and of democracy. to give us the strength to fight against those who want to destroy the fundamental underpinnings of this country. We have a lot to be thankful for, and it's important. I think we just take a few minutes as individuals, as families, certainly as a kehillah, to express our gratitude to HaKadosh Baruch Hu for all He has given us, both as Americans, as Jews, as Americans, as human beings, for what we have in our personal lives, what we have in our public lives, what we have in our communal or our national lives, our life. HaKadosh Baruch Hu continue to shower bracha upon all of humanity for many years to come. Listen, all right, have a great day. Have a great day. Whatever. Listen to last year's recording or something. You know. So let's go. I'm a Rabbi. Let's go. So remember again, over the last 2 days, what we established is that halacha l'maisa, the case of the Mishnah was dealing with taro. The case of the Mishnah was dealing with mixtures, right? And in the mixtures, ultimately, again, what we had was something prohibited getting mixed into a much greater number of permitted items. Yet again, the prohibited item was not bottled. So we spent the last 2 days, day and a half, yesterday, part of the previous days, focusing on why not? Why isn't the prohibited item just simply bottled? Wasn't it bottled? The quick answer to that is because it's another shabbat. It's chashuv, it's important. And again, the mechanics of it, es shabbat halimnos, kol shabbat halimnos, so we focus on all that. The bottom line is the item, the prohibited item, in this case, prohibited animal that gets mixed in is chashuv, is important, and therefore it is not bottled. Okay, so now comes along Rabbi. This is the follow-up. I'm a Rabbi. Now that the rabbi says, any of these cases, remember, these are all carbonic cases, where a prohibited carbon or prohibited animal is getting mixed in with another group of carbonos. And therefore, again, the halacha is you can't offer up any of those animals as carbonos. Now, again, remember, we're not going to each case in the Mishnah, so different cases in the Mishnah have different realities. So, for example, in the case of the chatas, right, the group of chatas offerings, there's no remedy at all. You just have to let them all die, unfortunately. In other cases of mixed up carbonos, ultimately, again, you allow them to graze so they develop a norm, redeem the whole chevra, and so on and so forth. The point is, you can't offer up any of those mixtures of animals as is. That's the halacha. Comes on Rabbi, and Rabbi says, Hashta de Ami Rabbana lo Nakri. Now that Rabbi said you can't offer up any of these kabbanos, the Gemara says, what if you did it? What if you did it? What if you ended up offering up these kabbanos? So what's the halacha? Lo Maratzi. Lo Maratzi means they do not work. In other words, they do not affect the union, they don't count towards your obligations. In other words, now that you're not allowed to offer up any of these mixtures of animals, if you did so, it does not go ahead and take care of your kabbanic obligation. Okay? Seems to be a pretty straightforward statement. Same thing, Gemara, listen to this. So Gemara 8 straight, about Yehuda the Rabbi. Shavim brings kasha to Rabbi. Chatos, listen to this. Chatos shenis ava v'olah, v'olah shenis ava b'chatos. So we'll say, so this is talking about bird offerings. Remember again, it's actually last paragraph, right? Bird chatos, so bird olah. We'll say, so right, chatos, how many simanim? 1. Where's the blood? 50% you got on this one, right below. Excellent, lamata, good. Olah, 2 simanim and lamala. Excellent again. Remember again, chatos, everything burned together. Or I should say chatas, excuse me. The only thing that's offered up is the blood. Everything else goes to the kohen. Olah, head and body burned separately. Obviously, it's an olah, so not consumed by the kohen. So in this case over here, you have a bird chatas and a bird olah. Now what happens? They got mixed in with each other. Now, obviously, that could be a problem because remember again, it's the same type of bird for both offerings. Either again a tar, right, turtle dove, or a yodel. Or I should say a turtle ben yod, turtle dove, or a pitzi. So the Gemara says, what's that? So in this case over here, so remember, chatas offerings are complicated, right? Because again, chatas doesn't really have redemption. So because of that, again, even if they got mixed in, so again, chatas shnis arba olah, v'olah shnis arba chatas, even if it's 1 in 10,000, you have to allow the whole mixture to die. This is what ends up happening whenever you have chatas fishes. But when is this? So when is this? So I'm very interested. The kohen yimlach, this is fascinating. That presupposes that after the mixture occurs, the kohen comes and asks a shayla, right? If the kohen she'in yimlach, but if the kohen didn't ask a shayla, and instead what did he do? He offered up the kabbanos, and what did he do? Asar l'malam, If you offered up all the birds, Lamala means what? Above the chotas. In other words, you do the blood applications above the red line. Then what? Mechza kosher, mechza pasul. Half of the birds will be kosher, half of the birds will be pasul. Right? Because again, remember, we assume that in this mixture, some of them are half, well, he's calling it half, right? Half a katos, half a ola. Therefore, half of the birds will be kosher as an ola, half of the birds will be pasul as katos. Lamata, if you offered all of them lamata, the blood is lamata. Mechza kosher, mechza pasul, same thing. Half of the birds will be kosher, half of the birds will be pasul. What if you did one above and one below? Then shling and psulos. Then ultimately, again, both of them will be pasul. Now we'll say, now why if you did one above, one below? Why both of them pasul? Shani Omer, katas kevalamala, va'ola kevalamata. Since already there's been so much confusion over here, right? So much mixture. I have to be further concerned that even that Cohen did the katas in the wrong place and the ola in the wrong place. So we'll say, what's the point of all this? What do you see from here? So what's fascinating about this is this seems to directly contradict Rabbi. Because what's happening here? What's happening here is if the coin were to ask, right? You have a mixture now of kashas and all the birds. If the coin were to ask, excuse me, what should I do with this? What will we tell him? What will we tell him? What will we tell him? Nothing. Don't do anything. Don't offer anything yet. What's the halacha? If you did offer them up, then what? At least some number of them are going to be kosher. That hurts Rabbi, because Rabbi said that halacha l'maisa, whenever you have a situation of karbanos that are not supposed to be offered, and you did, so you offered it, halacha l'maisa momarati doesn't work. So this contradicts Rabbi. This contradicts Rabbi. Ella, hakiman damer balechayim yizim. Rather, again, goes to chapter stage, according to Rabbi's statement goes according to the opinion that says that's balechayim yizim. Now, balechayim yizim, we've actually seen this concept before. Balechayim yizim means that sometimes an animal could be fundamentally set aside for non-use. That once there is a problematic issue with it, it could be fundamentally set aside for non-use. So the Gemara says, hakiman damer balechayim yizim. Versus the brisa that we just read before about the mixture, ultimately again, of katas and bird olah, that goes according to the opinion that says animals are not fundamentally or completely set aside. But Rabbi's worldview is Rabbi's worldview is once a carbon cannot be offered up, halacha l'maisa, it is fundamentally set aside for non-use, which means even if you offer it up, it's irrelevant and doesn't do anything. The brisa that we just quoted, the Rafuna Bar Yehuda just quoted is going to be as sometimes there are kabbalah that you're not supposed to offer, but if you offer them, they still could affect some type of carbonic reality. So the Gemara that's true. Once an animal has been shafted, if let's say again it was shafted and it's not fit for sacrificial use, it is forever unusable. And yet, Papa Ayin Dalit, 74a, Gemara says it's not either. Rabbi says, I want to just to give you the context of this case. This is a case ultimately again where you shafted an animal that was a balmum. The Kohen shafted an animal that was a balmum, and then the parts of that carbon got mixed in with other valid carbonic parts. So now, what do? Rabbi says, in Kara Parosh Shel after Mehen, Yitnabu Kalarashim, Rabbi says essentially, if you already offered up the head of one of them, you could offer up the head of the rest of them. The Gemara says, the logic behind that is because if one of the heads was already offered up, perhaps you could assume that it was the head of the invalid carbon that was already offered up. Once that was offered up, you should be able to offer up the rest. So what do you see here? Now this is by an animal that was shluta, right? This is ultimately again by an animal that was already shafted. Again, what do you see from here? That even by a shluta animal, we say bali chayim piyim, that ultimately again that animals that were shafted are not fully set aside for non-use. Which the Gemara says, "Who the Amar ki Chanana Mitzri?" Feels like Chanana Mitzri. Chanana Mitzri is incredible. The other time, the Chanana Mitzri Omer, Afi the dam because maybe Chaberu Umizadek lo. So literally translated, even if the blood is in the cup, you bring the other cup, but then ultimately again make it as a person first. Now what is that? Let's take a look at Rashi. This is actually a great case. Afi the dam second line now from the top of Rashi. Sir Hanaasa B'Fnim because Shekba Mishkat. So we'll say, here's the following case. Remember again, you have two goats. One is offered up inside the base of Mikdash, and one is sent out outside. Now they're a pair.
Because you
Remember again, the Mishnah Sefasima brings down, we draw lots, right? He says, La Hashem, La Azazel, they're a pair. What happens if you shefted what we call the inner kafas? Remember again, I both said this is a seer b'fnim. We spent a lot of time on this earlier in the Zefka. So let's say you shefted the seir La Hashem. You already have the blood in the coast. You're ready for the sprinkling. And then what happens? It's Azazel, right? It's Azazel counterpart, right? The one that's supposed to be sent out to the cliff dies. So almost all the other opinions say you gotta redo the whole process, right? Because they're a pair. Therefore, you can't. So if one of the couple dies, you have to start again. Hanan HaMitzri is of the opinion that says no, you don't have to start again. Rather, just get a new Sikir La'azazel, right? Just get a new cliff goat, right? Get a new Sikir La'azazel, and ultimately again, go ahead and you could use the blood. You could use the seer that you already shefted the mid and just bring a new one. So we'll say, so Rashi says over here, so what do you see from here? So what do you see from here? Hanan HaMitzri is the one who says that Balei Chayim Ein Nitchin Afilu B'Shkuta. It's a unique idea. So Hanan HaMitzri is of the opinion that says that even if an animal was shafted already and it's set aside for it doesn't become permanently set aside for non-use. So at that moment again, when the Sir Zazel dies, the blood is unusable in that moment. Now we'll say, if you would say Balei Chayim Nitchin, then what you would say is once the blood is unusable for a period of time, then what? It remains unusable forever. Hanan HaMitzri does not hold that way. He knows that even though it is temporarily unusable, right, because the blood of the inner chatas is going to be unusable until it has Azazel counterpart, just get it an Azazel counterpart, and you're good to go. All right, so what do I do with all this? So remember again, here's the point to remember. Rabbi, right? Rabbi says that halacha l'maisa. Once Chazal said, going back, reflecting on our Mishnah was all cases of prohibited animals, prohibited carbonic animals that get mixed in with permitted carbonic animals. What's the result of the mixture? Essentially, it's the same result of every mixture. What's the result of the mixture? Can't offer it up. Now, different mixtures have different mechanisms of dealing with that. But as the mixture stands right now, you can't offer it up. All Rabbi is saying is, halacha l'maisa, once the rabbi said you can't offer something up, even if you offered it up, it doesn't work. Lomaratzi. The Gemara then goes on just to show there are other opinions. Not everybody agrees with the statement of Rabbi. Most notably, Hanan HaMitzri, and others. So again, nevertheless, that was the statement of Rabbi. Let's go back here. I'm not Rabbi, who are very training Gemara. Listen to this. So now watch this. Rav Nachman said in the name of Rabbi the following ruling. Seems a little bit unrelated at first, but it's going to be related in just a moment. If you have a ring of Avodah Zarah, Now what's the last good? Ring of Avodah Zarah. Now what is the ring of Avodah Zarah? The Pashas, I don't know, they put a ring on the idol. Put a ring on the idol. So I might say, in Tabas Avodah Zarah, she's out of their Tabas, and it got mixed in with 100 other rings. So what's that law? And then one of the rings fell into the sea. So what's the sea? What happened over here? So I have an Avodah Zarah ring. My Avodah Zarah ring, it's not my Avodah Zarah. I don't want to Avodah Zarah. In other words, an Avodah Zarah ring gets mixed in with 100 of my rings. 100 of my rings. Good. So let's say, now what happens? Now, obviously, Avodah Zarah, most generally, what's the halacha with Avodah Zarah when it gets mixed into something? That's how Avodah Zarah things. What's the halacha? It's not bottle. Avodah Zarah is not bottle, right? So therefore, when that Avodah Zarah ring gets mixed in with my 100 rings, the pashtus, the mixture is also. Now something interesting happens, which is finally something interesting. Let's say now something interesting happens. That's how one ring falls into the sea. So one ring is into the sea. So let's see, now watch this. It's incredible. So that says, Putra Kulan, all the rings are permitted. Incredible, no? All rings are permitted. Why? Why? Because I say that the ring that fell into the sea was the prohibited ring. Incredible. And one ring fell aside from the mixture. I say the one ring that fell into the sea, that was the Avodah Zarah ring. Okay. So let's say, so that's a tremendous assumption. But that's how that paskins. Incredible. So the Gemara says, now watch this. Rav Nachman. So Rav is Rav Nachman. Rav is remembering it. Rav Nachman is quoting Rav. So Rav is the question to Rav Nachman. Afilu Akos Belibo Yamus Kulan So we'll say, but on a second. We learned before, right? We learned before ultimately again in the previous place. But Allah so when you have a mixture, you have a mixture, and ultimately again, even if one prohibited item gets mixed in with 10,000, Rebo is 10,000, that's how you say Rabbi. I'm going to make a point. All of them must be left to die. So the Gemara says, why is that so? Neymar Guinness is. So we'll say, why not say the following? Why not say that halacha l'maisa? Look at Rashi this morning. V'amaya Musa Rashi says, "V'cheivan shemis hachaman literally they v'nimad yisuramai k'anacham yikavu." So we'll say, so for argument's sake, if one of them died, why not say that halacha l'maisa? Halacha l'maisa, the one that died was the one that was Isser died. The same way that we say that the one ring that fell into the water, ultimately the sea, was the Avodah Zarah, right? Say that the one that died from the group, ultimately again, is the prohibited one. I'm going to Rav the Omer Kebelozer. Rav holds the Kebelozer. What is it? It's not Eliezer Omer in Kala Harosh Shal Achamehan. You could go Kala Russian. Both of these exactly his initial quote on the top of the dot. So remember again, this is if you had a Balmum that was shafted, a Balmum carbon that was essentially shafted, then mixed in with other carbonic pieces. So Eliezer says, once you offered up the head, ultimately again, you can go ahead and sacrifice everything, offer up everything else. The Gemara says, why? Because halacha l'maisa again, it's the same thing. That when we have a mixture, and then something is isolated from the mixture, for some reason, halachically, we have the right to assume that it was the prohibited item which was isolated from the mixture. That's the common theme, right? So you have a balmum carbon that was shafted, cut up into pieces. The pieces are mixed with other permitted carbonic pieces. One of the heads was offered, and as he says, you should assume that it was the prohibited head that was offered. So it's done already. So because it's done already, you might as well go ahead and offer up the rest of the group. So Rav subscribes that same idea. You have an Avodah Zarah ring that got mixed in with 100 other permitted rings. One of the rings fell into the sea. We can assume that it was the Avodah Zarah ring. Ultimately, again, that was dispensed with. Rabbi Elazar said, Rabbi Eliezer Ela Shnayim. About Echad Lo. So what's very interesting? Even Rabbi Eliezer says that you could offer up the rest of the Kabanos. What does he say? You could offer them up 2 at a time. It's very interesting. 2 at a time. And everyone's saying, now, why 2 at a time? Because like this, if you're offering up the rest of the sacrificial parts 2 at a time, at least there's a probability that one of them is not the prohibited one. Right? So in other words, so that way at least you know there's a problem. Is when you in Rabbi Elazar's case, when you burnt that first sacrificial head, so as much as halachically we'd like to say, okay, you know what, that was the prohibited one, do you know for sure? No. So therefore you can't offer up the rest of the sacrificial parts 1 at a time because it's possible that the one that you're holding in your hand is the prohibited one. So like this, if you're doing it 2 at a time, there's a probability that at least one of them is not the prohibited one. So that's how I ask you. So again, so therefore I'm going to say, what do you do with the ring case? I'm going to watch this. So Rav said, or nothing said, I agree. I agree with the rings. You have to sell them 2 at a time as well. And let's say, now watch this. So let's kind of bring this circle. So in other words, what Rav is saying is like this. So Rav says, here's the case. There's an Avodah Zarah ring that gets mixed in with 100 of my rings. Now, obviously, at first glance, status of the mixture, awesome. Right? Because Avodah Zarah is not bottom. Avodah Zarah is not bottom. Okay? Yet Rav said then one of the rings falls into the sea. Irretrievably falls into the sea. Right? So then everyone say, what's the halacha? Rav says the rest of the mixture is mutter. Now, again, come full circle. Rav says it's mutter. What he means is like this. You could sell off the rest of those rings, but you need to sell them 2 at a time. You can't sell them 1 at a time. Why? Because see what we're doing over here? We're kind of straddling both sides of the fence. But I'm wondering what we're saying is the ring that fell into the sea is the Avodah Zarah one. Are we 1,000% sure of that? No. We're pretty sure of that. But therefore, what we're going to do to hedge our bets a little bit more is that when you sell off the rest of the rings, sell them 2 at a time. Because if you sell 2 at a time, halacha l'maisa again, we're confident that at least one of them is not the Avodah Zarah. If you sell it 1 at a time, the problem is how do you know that one is not the Avodah Zarah one? Okay, fascinating idea. Continuing along. So watch this, and we'll say another kind of building on that previous case. That says you have a ring of Avodah Zarah. that goes in and gets mixed in with 100 other rings. Upershu arba'im l'makom echad, v'shishim makom echad. Okay, so let's say now watch what happens. Then what happens? You take this now. You had 101, right? 100 mutter ones. One above this other one. Once again, one of the rings goes ahead and falls into the sea. Okay, so let's say now what happens? Now what happens? So the Gemara says, no, I'm sorry. 100 rings, right? And above the Zara goes ahead and gets mixed in. Now what happens? 40 of the rings are separated into one spot. 60 of the rings are separated into another spot. Okay, so the Gemara says, if now ultimately again, Rashi says over here, now one of the group of 40 is separated, and then what? Rashi says over here, it's almost right across in Rashi. So we'll say, now watch, okay, so just follow this over here. I've got 100 rings. And I've all the Zara ring, ultimately again it gets mixed in. Then the group is split. 40 are taken to one spot, 60 are taken to a different spot. Now what happens? One of the 40 Tevra then is separated and gets mixed in with another group of rings. So Rav says that halacha l'maisa, beresh achas me'arbaim, eino oseres. Ultimately, again, one of the group of 40 gets mixed in with another group. Ultimately, again, the second group is not us. It's mutter. Achas mishishim oseres. Watch this. But if one of the rings of the group of 60 subsequently gets mixed in with another group, ultimately, again, the secondary group is going to be us. First, okay, what's the shot? Why is it that if one of the 40 group, right, one of the 40 group gets mixed in with the secondary group, that ultimately the secondary group is not usher? This is fascinating. Why? Because they're both saying, remember, let's go back for just a second. The one ring of Avodah Zarah got mixed in with a group of 100. The group of 100 was then split into a group of 60 and a group of 40. If one from the group of 40 gets mixed in with another group, ultimately the secondary group is going to be mutter. Why? Because they're all saying, where do we assume the Avodah Zarah ring is? With the group of 60. Why? Why do I make that assumption? Just the majority. That's the statistical probability is that the Avodah Zarah ring is with the larger group. So therefore, again, a halacha l'maisa, if a ring from the group of 40 gets mixed in, ultimately again with another group, ultimately the secondary group is going to be mutter. Achas mishishim, Simar says, I understand. Achas mishishim, nami, I mean, it's really what we saw. I understand. But even so, when I was to watch this, so now what did we say? Therefore, we assume that the Avodah Zarah ring is in the group of 60, and therefore we said that if one of the group of 60 gets mixed in with another group, it answers the secondary group as well. But why? Why not say that when you get one from the group of 60, chances are that's the mutter one, right? Because where's the Avodah Zarah ring? Where is it? Still with the majority, still in the mixture with the majority. And therefore, again, the secondary group from the one ring from the group of 60 ultimately should still be mutter. The Gemara says, okay, you're right, let's reframe this. Hello. So let's read what you have to say this. In Pirshu Arban Pulumakom Echad, Ein Osros. And Allah the 40 were separated out of the original group. Ultimately, again, to one place, they do not go ahead and convey any history. Now, what does that mean? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi, right across. Ella, Hafi Kamar, Pershu Ha'arban Pulumakom Echad, V'nis Arvu B'shar Tabos, Einon Osri. Damino Yisur B'shisha Yisach. The Lord says, now we're reframing the case. What's the case? Same thing. I have a group of 100 rings. Avodah Zarah ring gets mixed in. Then the group is split into 40 and 60. So I say, then what happens? Halacha l'maisa now, the entire group of 40 is mixed in with a secondary group of rings. That's the case. So instead of one from the group of 40 getting mixed in with a secondary group, the entire group of 40 is getting mixed in with a secondary group. So let's say, so what's halacha? They don't answer. Now, once again, why doesn't it answer? Why doesn't the group of 40 answer the secondary group? Why not? Because we assume that the Avodah Zarah ring is where? With the group of 60. On the other hand, Shishim Lamakom Echad Oslos. Oh, that makes a lot more sense. If the group of 60 then gets mixed in ultimately again with the secondary group, then what's halacha? It's also why? Because again, the entire group is 60, because we assume that the Avodah Zarah ring is with the group of 60, and therefore it is us. You got one side, by the way. So what I just want to point out over here is, the Gemara is presupposing that the way Avodah Zarah works, because it's not bottle, therefore again, because it's not bottle, the Isser keeps moving forward. Right? That in other words, it doesn't make a difference how many mixtures you keep mixing it into. If there's the possibility of Avodah Zarah in there, it's going to keep conveying Isser to the group. So, right? Because remember, again, now we're already getting a second step removed. We've got Avodah Zarah mixed into the group of 100. The group of 100 split between 60 and 40. If the group of 40 gets mixed in with the secondary group, it's going to be mutter because we assume that the Avodah Zarah is with a larger group. If the group of 60 gets mixed in with the secondary group, it makes the secondary group usher, ultimately, again, because we assume that the Avodah Zarah is the Avodah. What do you see from here? What's the tremendous Musar Haskell? We see from here that there are certain things that are so toxic, certain things that are so negative, that it doesn't make a difference how much good you have, it fundamentally erodes all of the good that is, all of the good that may be around. And also we know this. That's why the Rambam writes that there are certain midos, that halacha again, no matter how much good you have to eliminate them in totality, right? Chief amongst them is chas, anger. Anyway, the Rambam says, and again I will say there's certain character traits, certain the way life works, is all of us have deficiencies. Right? All of us have deficiencies. All of us have things that in any given moment are broken inside of us. And the truth is also all of us have them. And even though I know that, I also know I'm not fixing them right now. I'm not. As much as I'd love to, I can't, I won't. We all have stuff like that. I know that it's glaringly broken inside of me right now, but I also know that for whatever the reason, I'm not actively fixing it. So what do? You try to, guess what, like, not leverage your risk, but hedge your right there. Hedge what? Hedge your bet.
You didn't follow the rules. You didn't do that. You're not a ticket.
You know, like, I would call it like triage. People. All of us live with certain inconsistencies that I know I'm not fixing right now. I know I have to fix it, but for whatever the reason, I know I'm not fixing it right now. But what I need to do is I need to kind of balance the equation a little bit. So what do? I bolster myself with some additional good. And although the additional good does not fix the stuff that's broken, it helps to address it at least a little bit. Just a little bit until I can get to it. It's like anything in life. A person runs a business. There's a million things you want to do in your business. I would assume not a business, but I would assume there's a million things you want to do in your business. I can't do everything right now. So I have to create a hierarchy of what I have to do. So I'm addressing issues 1, 2, and 3. 4, 5, and 6 are important, but I know I can't get to them right now. But they're still glaring issues. So I need to figure out how to triage a little bit, kind of keep those things in check. I'll get to them when I get to them. That's a lot like life. In other words, in myself, there's a whole bunch of things I have to fix. There are things I'm going to fix now, and there are other things that I can't get to right now. But I need to figure out a way to kind of make sure they don't get worse. So I got to band-aid. How do you band-aid the stuff inside of you that's really broken, but you can't address right now? By infusing more good. But more Torah, more tefillah, more tzedakah, more chesed. It doesn't address the stuff that's broken, but at least it triages it a little bit. But there are certain things in life that are so costly. There are certain things in life that are so terrible. Certain things that are so abrasive that if you don't deal with it, it's not bottle. No matter how much good you have, it's just not bottle. And those are the things we have to identify within ourselves, like immediately. What are the things that, even though I can't fix it right now, if I don't address it right now, no matter how much good, it's like Avodah Zarah. Avodah Zarah is so costly that it doesn't matter how many more mixtures you put it into, halacha l'maaseh, it's never bottle. Okay, man, then let's get back to this. Says the Gemara. A lot of profundity over here. So the Gemara says, so that's the case. She's not going to have also. Basically the Shmuel. So when we say this over in front of Shmuel, I'm going to have let's go have it. Don't bring any riots from Avodah Let's go have it. Why? Shesveka, Usvek Sveka Asura Ad Ha'olam. Avodah Zarah is different, also, right? Because Avodah Zarah, the severity of Avodah Zarah is such that it is Asr, and it is continuously Asr Ad Sof Ha'olam. It is never bottle. It's never bottle. Which the Gemara says, really, is that so? Meistei, Safek Avodah Shochavim Asura, Usvek Sveka Mutaras. So the Gemara says, Safek Avodah Zarah is Asr, but Svek Sveka, a double Safek, ultimately again is going to be Mutter. What's an example of a double Safek? Here we go. Okay, so here we go. Let's see, you have a cup of Avodah Zarah, literally like a cup used for Avodah Zarah. You have a Avodah Zarah becher. Right, so what happens? So my Avodah Zarah becher gets mixed in, not my Avodah Zarah, and Avodah Zarah becher, that gets mixed in with my other bechers. So then we'll say, what's that? Hakula Asurin. So all of us, because Avodah Zarah is not bottom. Dirish. After Mehem the Rebo, or may Rebo the Rebo, Mutari. But if one of the bechers then separates from the group, and ultimately again gets mixed in with Rebo, let's say 10,000. 10,000 is the way that the Gemara just used. Like that's just an exaggerated number. Right? It gets mixed in with 10,000, and then I will say one of the group of the 10,000 gets mixed in with another 10,000. Mutter. Oh, what do you see from here? You see from here that I will say even Avodah Zarah at a certain point, ultimately again will get lost in a super majority. The Gemara says. Shabbos says, so which one is it? Do we say that Avodah Zarah is forever mutter, no matter how many stekas you have, or no, at a certain point in time, perhaps Avodah Zarah becomes mutter? To which the Gemara says, it's not focused time. Tonight, we decided who the Omer, here we go, Rimoni Badan, is from the Chol Shuhu. So we'll say Rimoni Badan. Now we have Rimoni Badan. Remember again, what are Rimoni Badan? That's one of the 6 items, right, that are so fun that they're never bottled. So Rimoni Badan, the Chol Shuhu, Rimoni Badan ultimately again are going to be Asher the Chol Shuhu. Case, that's what I'll say. What's the case? What's the case? Case of Nafal Echad Mehem L'Sof Livo. If one of them falls ultimately again into a mixture of 10,000. Well, maybe bowl really bowl, and from 10,000 to another 10,000 asur, right? Because it's not bottle. It's not bottle. That's the first thing. That Avodah Zarah ultimately again is never bottle. We shouldn't use on the Shumar B'Shimon. We bowl asurin, we bowl the shlosha, we shlosha l'makom echad mutter. So the Shimon says, no. If ultimately again you have Avodah Zarah, and Avodah Zarah falls into a mixture even of 10,000 permitted items, and then something from the group of 10,000 falls into a group of 3, and then something from the group of 3 falls into another smaller group, it's mutter. On the side, this second opinion holds that halacha l'maisa at a certain point, Avodah Zarah ultimately again becomes permitted. Shmuel D'Amar l'Riba Asurim. Shmuel D'Amar Kiman. So who does Shmuel hold like? Shmuel holds like Kiman. According to Rabbi Yehuda, ultimately, even by non-Avodah Zarah, ultimately, this kasha is not bottled. Rabbi Shimon, Rabbi Shimon holds that at a certain point, right, sake of Avodah Zarah becomes mutter. Maybe you'll say, according to Rabbi Shimon makes a distinction ultimately again between Avodah Zarah and Shari Surim. What about the following statement? Following Brayso. Safek Avodah Zarah. If you have a Safek Avodah Zarah, it's Aser. Usveka Mutaras. But a double Safek. Someone says, just to give you this idea, what's a double Safek? Avodah Zarah falls into a group of rings. Then one of the members of the group of rings falls into another group. And then that falls into another group. That's sake, a double suffix. So ultimately, again, at a certain point in time, it becomes mutter. So who's that money? Rabbi Shimon. We all know Rabbi Shimon. In reality, ultimately, again, if let's see Rabbi Shimon, it's Shmuel Sabalak Rabbi Yehuda B'Chada. Shmuel is like Rabbi Yehuda in one case, i.e. Avodah Zarah. That sake by Avodah Zarah will be mutter. Upolit Ali B'Chada. And ultimately, again, disagrees with the other case, that ultimately, again, it will be. And part disagrees in the secondary case. Omer Mag, Mary Bol the Shosh Mishoshal Makamachad Mutter. This was a church of the Brisa. Right, so remember again, he said that the Avodah Zarah falls into a group of 10,000, and then from a group of 10,000 to another group, and then from that secondary group into a group of 3, it will be mutter on the base. Maishna Shlosha the Ikaruba. Why into a group of 3? Because ultimately there's a row. I was saying even if it falls into a group of 2, Shnayim Nani Ikaruba. Even in a group of 2, there's a row. Which we must be right. Maish Gimel Bishkani Tartibu. When we say 3, what's 3? 3 merely means 2 plus 1. That it falls into a group of 2 other items besides itself. By schema, The other possibility ultimately is Savala Kabila. So that ultimately again he holds like Rabbi Eliezer. So we'll say, so bottom line, so I'll deal a little bit quickly. Ultimately again, so that meaning when he holds like Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Eliezer says that Speka Bible, that's Kohavim, ultimately again is going to be us. So what's the takeaway? Tremendous takeaway over here. Fundamental machlokas about the nature of bittul by Avodah Zarah. Fundamental machlokas. There's a school of thought that says Avodah Zarah is never bottom. Never ever bottom, which means it doesn't make a difference how many mixtures the Avodah Zarah keeps falling into. By the way, it's not just Avodah Zarah itself. What is it? It's Safek Avodah Zarah. Because remember, in all of these cases, what we're talking about over here is Avodah Zarah gets mixed into a mixture, then a part of that mixture gets into a secondary mixture, and then the part of the secondary mixture gets mixed into a tertiary mixture. Right? So let's say, the first school of thought says it's not bottom. It's not bottom. Avodah Zarah is never, ever bottom. And it doesn't matter how many steps you keep going, Avodah Zarah will continuously be us. Second school of thought says no. There's a limit. There's a limit. In other words, Avodah Zarah gets mixed into a mixture, yes, it's usher. That mixture gets into a secondary mixture, it will be usher also. But once you get to the tertiary mixture, what we call now a sveka, it's bottle. It's bottle. Now again, obviously it's only bottle in what? If you have at least a simple majority, right? You will need at least a 2-to-1 ratio, but Allah might say bottle. So we'll say fundamental, dramatic, riveting, mind-blowing mathematics. Let's go a little bit back here, a couple minutes left. Next, Amr Shlakish, Chavish Shal Truma, Shinzar V'Chavish, Chavios, listen to this. It's like this. You have a barrel of truma that got mixed in with 100 other barrels. So again, I will say, so in this case over here, barrel of truma gets mixed in with another 100 non-truma barrels. Now, again, I will say, normally, what's it? The nafla achas be'el yamamela, and one of the barrels falls into the sea. Now, again, this sounds very much like the case of Rabbi. Avodah Zarah ring gets mixed in with 100 rings. One of the rings falls into the sea. What's the halacha? Putra kulan. All of the barrels are mutter. Why? Because we assume that the barrel that fell into the sea was the truma barrel. Okay, great. So the Gemara says, but why do you need the same case twice? You already told me this. You already illustrated this with the case of the rings of Avodah Zarah. Why do I need both cases? The Rav Nachman, the Itzar Reish Lakish. I need Rav Nachman's case. Rav Nachman was the ring case. Rav Nachman was the ring case. Ultimately, again, and I need the case of Reish Lakish. I need both cases. Why? The image Rav Nachman, if it were just Rav Nachman from the ring case, Hava Amina, Hanini the Avodah Zarah, then the Eila Matir. I would have said like this. Maybe Rav Nachman rules that way in that case, because if you don't rule in that case, if you don't rule in that case that the ring that fell into the sea was the Avodah Zarah ring, there's no way to permit the mixture. Like there's no other mechanism for permitting mixture. They will not hear it. About Truma, the issue I don't know. But in the Truma case, in the barrel case, there is a way to permit the mixture. How do you permit the mixture? Well, I'm not permit the mixture, but there is a mechanism. What's the mechanism? Sell it to a Kohen. What's the worst case scenario over here? The worst case scenario over here is that all the barrels have to be treated like Truma. No problem. Sell it to a Kohen. Now, granted, you're going to take a loss, right? Because the Kohen literally realizes he's got you over the barrel. So why? Because remember, again, Truma is for a very limited population. So you probably will take a loss, but Lamaisa is absolutely a mechanism for resolution. So I might have thought the only time you say that we can assume that the item that fell into the sea is the Avodah Zarah item is when that's the only mechanism of resolution. And therefore, your Avodah Zarah makes sense. But where there is another mechanism of a resolution, by Truma, you sell to a Kohen. Maybe we don't make the assumption that the barrel that fell into the sea was the Truma barrel. But you need the Reish Lakish, and if you just learn from Reish Lakish, remember again, Reish Lakish is the barrel case. Halamina Chavis, the Minkra and Nitilas. Very interesting. I would have said, when does this concept apply? Ultimately, again, by a barrel, because when a barrel falls into the sea and leaves the mixture, it's recognized. About Tabas, the Minkra and Nitilas alone. But by a ring, where when one ring falls from the mixture into the sea, it's not recognized. So what do you have to be concerned? That's very interesting. We have to be concerned that maybe since it's not recognizable, people won't realize that a ring fell into the sea, and they will think that the reason why the mixture is permitted is why? Because Avodah Zarah is batal barol. And I will say that's catastrophic. Because again, even if you know that sex steka is mutter by avodah zarah, no one's holding that the initial mixture is mutter. Therefore, again, both sides tzrichi. Therefore, we need both cases, and therefore both cases are correct. So both in the case of the ring that gets mixed in, when one ring falls in, halakha l'maaseh going to be soon as the avodah zarah ring that falls in, and the rest of the mixture is going to be mutter. The barrel of truma that gets into with 100 other barrels. One barrel falls into the sea. We assume that it is the barrel of truma that fell in, and the rest of the barrels are mutter. And therefore, again, even though the cases sound incredibly similar, they both have their own halachic uniqueness, and therefore, ultimately, again, both cases need to be studied. That's what I'll say. We'll stop over there for today. We're fine. We're fine. We're good. We're good. We'll pick up here tomorrow. We'll say, shkoyach.
These 500 deaths a year. I've got a horrible case about a lady struggling, in pain, really hurting. Kept taking Tylenol. Tylenol with codeine. Oh, okay. Tylenol with codeine. Tylenol 3. That's schedule 3.
Say that again.
That's different.
It's different Tylenol, different regular. So acetaminophen.
So how do you feel about it being rescheduled?
Well, it's better. Certainly it's better. I believe if it's rescheduled, what does that mean? It can be prescribed now, and it can be prescribed state by state. Even in Texas, there's some medical uses. I feel like it should be like alcohol. I think you should be of a certain age to be able to use it, and I think it's not for everybody. I think that's important, that it isn't for everybody. There are people that have very
all right, Joel said good morning. Good morning. Let us begin. Begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's thanks. Our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev, Allison Adam Steinmetz, in memory of Adam's grandfather, Sheldon Steinmetz, Harav Shlomo Tzvi, Ben Ruvain, Harav Shlomo Tzvi Ruvain, Ben Shimon Zifron Bebracha, Semi Malka Estes, in memory of their parents, Yitzchak Leib, Ben Aaron Cohen, Sarah Rachel Bas, Baruch Avram, Hinda Bas, Henach Ephraim, in memory of Staff Sergeant Naftali Yonah Gordon Hashem Kumdalo, Oren Kathy Pollack, Mary, my sister Leah Bashmuel, and Zachary Shulam is Bashmuel, Esther Bas Zachariah, who says all during the month of Kislev, a week of learning sponsors, Baruch Marina Dubin, in honor of the Chasana, Baruch Hashem, beautifully, we told us last night that our daughter Sophie Kizavi Grenat, and the Zilcha to build a Bayis Ne'eman B'Yisrael. And I got the only sponsors for today, Ayala and Sarah Steinberg, and continued help. Priscilla's Hannah Bas Susha and Bas Simra Aiken and daughters Orly and Yael as a source for Pushim for Saeed Yosef HaKohen Ben Tashi, who is having surgery today. We hope that in Hashem Saeed will have a full Shalom of Zidus Kol Chol Yisrael. All the Neshama Shabbat Ali, the families in the common, all those. Yitzhak Hashem. We need the Zohar Tolos and Bracha should be Zocha to acquire Kodesh Baruch Hu today and the days to come. Also, with that, let us begin. We have a lot to do today. A really incredible dot ahead of us. Today's top is Ayin Gimel 73. We are picking up on Ayin Gimel Dalet. So we left off again. Remember, we're trying to answer one simple question in the Mishnah, which is, why isn't the animal that is mixed in with the other permitted animals mutal? Right? That's the simple case in the Mishnah, where halakha is going to have a prohibited animal that is mixed in with a number of permitted animals. So now the shaila is, why don't we say simple bittul? Remember again, Midnaraisa had betrayed bottle. Right? Anything that is prohibited is permitted in a mixture of 2 to 1. So why not just say bittul right off the bat? So we gave a couple of different answers. The last answer the Gemara gave, it's very simple. It's what's called a davar sheba minyan. Rabbi say, now remember, what is davar sheba minyan meaning? As opposed to getting into kol shadako limnos, es shadako limnos, which is one of those machloks on both sides that make sure you commit it to memory, because we're going to see that throughout all of Shas. We have seen it throughout all of Shas. Leaving that aside, it's a simple idea of darshamin. Darshamin means anything that is sometimes looked at as an individual unit is not batal. That's it. Not all the time, not most of the time. That's some of the time, as you have an item that sometimes is sold or looking or reckoned as an individual unit. Halakha said is not batal. Certain animals fit that bill. Right? An animal sometimes is sold as part of a chevra, but also other times is also sold, right, or used commercially as an individual unit. Therefore, again, it's not batal. So the Gemara says, the second line down from the top, I'm doing back. The Sanyo, Litra Kitzios, this is a very interesting case. Litra Kitzios, Shadar Sab Eagle. Okay, so here's the thing. So first of all, Litra Kitzios, Litra is a measure.
You should learn how to manage your mind.
It's actually interesting. It actually points out the actual etymological root of this word is Ktsios from Russian of Mitzvah, which was a tool. Now, what was it a tool used for? So apparently, if you had figs, what they used to do is like this: they used to make cakes of pressed figs. How do you make a cake of pressed figs? By the way, Thanksgiving is coming. This may come in handy for you, right? How do you make a cake of pressed figs? Right. So the nice again, you take your fig, then you have to take out the stem. The tool to take out the stem was called the mitzvah. Then it would be spread out to let it dry. Then what they would do is they would pack these together as cakes. You pack, and then afterwards, what you would do is if you would sell a piece of it, you would go and make actually slice like a piece of the cake of the city's all done just cake of pressed figs. So interesting enough, so fascinating. I don't know why this is, but it's called the mitzvah or literal Ktsios, based on the lashon of the tool used to de-stem it. Okay. In any event, so what do you have over there? You have a literal Ktsios. Now Rashi points out over here, look at Rashi right across to the right. Literal Ktsios, Mishko literal Shaltein in Yideshos, Shaltruma, Shekitzam Beizemo, the Klisha Shmo Mitzvah. So once again, here's the case. I have a cake of pressed figs. A cake of pressed figs, but ultimately again is of Truma. That's the important part to remember over here. This is no ordinary cake of pressed figs. It's Truma. Now what happened? So the Gemara says, "Shadar Sa'ki Eagle." The Eagle again is an eagle dasa. This is very interesting. So what did you do? You went ahead and you essentially took this cake of pressed figs of Truma, and you pressed it onto another cake of pressed figs in a cleave. Our eagle actually says over here is shin cleave. There was a utensil called an eagle. The Gemara says, "The Darcy bought Ktsios, and the bucking Zubazu, the Nasi eagle Kamogina." So essentially, this eagle is the utensil in which you would make the cake of pressed figs. So there was a circular cleave. You would press the figs in there, and again, it would become this cake of pressed figs. So you imagine that's the following scenario. So imagine you have this cleave, it's filled with figs. Now, what ends up happening is, you can imagine you have a ring of figs. We'll call that the literal Ktsios. That ring of figs, ultimately again, is Truma. What did you do? You took that ring and you pressed it into the eagle. So now you mix the ring of figs of Truma, and you put it, you pressed it into the top of one of the eagle utensils. What's the issue? You don't know which eagle utensil you pressed it into. So again, so just to give you the imagery, right? You have a bunch of these eagle utensils, right? A bunch of these pressed molds, and again, you have a ring of Truma figs. You press the Truma figs into the mouth of one of those molds. You do not know which one. Okay, so that's the piece of it. So literally, Ktsios, Shadar Sa'ki Eagle. You took a ring of Truma pressed figs. You pressed it into the mouth of one of the molds. The image of the is eagle darsa, and you don't know which mold you put it into. Never say. Or I'll be chavis in your dad is a chavis darsa. Similarly, let's say instead of using a mold, you were using a barrel. Same idea. So you took the ring of Truma figs, you pressed it into the mouth of one of the barrels, but you do not know which barrel you placed it into. Kaveres, the image of the is a kaveres darsa. Kaveres probably normally means like a beehive, but in this case it means a mold or a basket shaped like a hive. It's all the same idea. You have this ring of pressed figs of Truma, you pressed it into the mouth of one of these utensils, and you don't know which utensil you put it into. So let's say, now, the shaila is, so now what do I do? Now, what's the good news in this? The good news in this is you don't want to mix into the rest of the mold. Is it mixed in? Not really, not like in a classic sense. Why? Because remember, again, it's sitting on top. So the good part is, I kind of know where it is, but I don't know where it is. In other words, I know that it's sitting on the top of the mouth of one of these utensils, one of these molds. I just don't know which utensil it's in. So what's that about? So Rabbi Meir says, Rabbi Lazar Omer. So Rabbi Meir now quotes this machlokas. He says like this: Rabbi Lazar Omer, no one salionos, he would include those ma'alos salionos. So this is very interesting. The mayor essentially says, we view the top layer. Now remember again, the way these cake-suppressed figs were often made was, essentially what you were doing was, you were stacking layer after layer of figs and then pressing them down. It's like, you ever see like how they make shawarma? If you haven't, don't do it, right? It ruins the experience. But for myself, it's not like they're getting like a piece of meat that size. Well, instead what they're doing is they're actually layering pieces of meat, right, one on top of the other on that stick. So it's kind of the cake of fresh fig is made in a similar type of fashion as well. You're layering the figs. So because they're separate and distinct, Rabbi Meir, so the laws is something very interesting. He says essentially, we view the layer on top of each, we'll call it mold, of each utensil as if it is separate, right? As if it's separate, and then we view all of the lower layer figs as their own amount. If there's enough figs in the collected bottom layers, more than the figs on the top layer, then ultimately again the true figs are buckled and everything is more fascinating. So take a look at Rashi for just a moment. Rashi says over here. Rashi says over here. Lord also healing kudos. Apapi she'in kan komin shal kofirin shal heter levada iser levada iser v'katonos kimin b'chala safek l'sartan ha'yonos l'bakla. Lord is called Shlos HaTachtonos V'Alyonos Shebechol HaKilim Kudos Zumu Leves B'Kulan V'Tachtonos B'Shalaf V'Salos. So this is an incredible Kiddush. And by the way, you might operating under the idea over here that Shuma's bottle, Shuma's going to be bottle ultimately again in a ratio of 100 to 1. So interestingly enough, the Gemara says over here, even though the barrels or the utensils are separate and distinct, halachically we view them as a mixture. And we view essentially the top layer of figs of every barrel mixed in together with the bottom layers of all the barrels. So as long as there is enough of figs, collected figs in the bottom barrels, ultimately again to be mabakal the upper layer, you're good to go. So if there's 100 times more figs in the collective bottom layers, what's the tremendous Kiddush of this? Tremendous Kiddush is just separate barrels, like the total separate barrels. But yet again, Rabbi Lozo essentially looks at this as, because the subject develops upon all of the barrels, therefore, I'm using barrels as the example, but whatever the particular utensil, therefore we're able to do them as a mixture. It's incredible. So Rabbi Yeshua says, Enish mea pumin yalu, ve'imra hapumin asirin, v'ashulayim nikarim. So Rabbi Yeshua says like this, no, the only way it works is if there's 100 other barrels. If there's 100 mouths of utensils, then the truma can be bottled. In other words, as opposed to the Lazar, who calculates the 100 to 1 bittul ratio, utilizing the figs on the bottom of the barrels, the Yeshua says no. The 100 to 1 ratio has to be from the mouth barrels. In other words, if you have 101 barrels, and now in one of the barrels a layer of truma figs got mixed in, then you could view the truma as bottle, because we look at the tops of the barrels again as all a mixture. But you can't combine the bottom layer of figs, ultimately again to be mabakal the truma figs. Incredible. So the Gemara says as follows. So fine, that's Rabbi Yeshua. Good. Rabbi Yehuda Omer. Rabbi Yehuda is a living. So I will say Rabbi Yehuda is a different. Now remember, this was Rabbi Meir's version of the Machlokes of the Lazar of Yeshua. Rabbi Yehuda has his own version. Yehuda Omer, Rabbi Lazar Omer, Inish Sham Kofumen Yalu Ve'igmar Hakumen Asur. So again, in Rabbi Yehuda's version, Rabbi Lazar says like this. Rabbi Lazar says, no, there are 100 other mouths of barrels. In other words, you need a 100 to 1 ratio to be mabakal truma. So at the end of the day, there's 100 other mouths of barrels, and Einach Binyamin, that all the barrels will be mutter. But if not, ultimately, again, the barrels will be us. Rabbi Yeshua says the most, that this is going to be the important part for us today. Rabbi Yeshua says no. Even if there's 300 barrels, 300 mouths of barrels, the litra of truma is not going to be bottled. Now, why not? Take a look at Rashi. Rashi is in the second wide line. Listen to this. Why? The whole shedarka limnos lo bottle. Davar Sheba Minyan. Because they both say why. So they should say like this. They should say because sometimes figs are sold as individual figs. So because of that, it's a Davar Sheba Minyan, and a Davar Sheba Minyan is never bottled. Wow. So the Yeshua says, I don't care. You have 500 barrels. It does not make a difference. Figs, again, remember, full circle, first circle. What are we doing here? This is not an existential question. I'm just asking in general, what are we doing here this morning? Right? So remember again, we're answering one simple question, which is Mishnah. Why are you getting all worked up about a prohibited animal getting mixed into a group of permitted animals? Why don't we just say the prohibited animal is bottle? Which, okay, now we've been doing with this, now the second day we're doing with this question. Today's answer is it's a Davar Sheba Minyan. Davar Sheba Minyan means an item that is at any point in time looked at as an individual unit. And a Davar Sheba Minyan is never bottled. So I'll say, so now, who says that Davar Sheba Minyan is never bottled? Oh, Rabbi Yeshua. This is what we've been looking for this whole month. So what does Rabbi Yeshua say? That if you have Truma pigs that got mixed in with other pigs, I don't care if you have 500 other openings of barrels. It doesn't matter. Why? Because pigs are a Davar Sheba Minyan, sometimes looked at as an individual entity, and therefore halacha l'maisa never bottled. Incredible. Good. So let's go. So let's just something like that. This whole discussion, that's the line. That's the line we're looking for in all of this. Darsa, the eagle, the eagle darsa. Now listen, interestingly enough, in all of these cases, remember, in all of these cases, what's unique about this is, what do I know? What do I know about the literature of Truma pigs? What do I know? What do I know? What do I know? I know that I put it in the mouth. I know that it's Truma. I know that it's a pig, and I also know that I put it by the mouth of the barrel. Like that's a little bit of leverage in that case. I know the location, I just don't know which barrel it is. Now the price just transitions. That's something over there. What happens if I mix it into the barrel? So what happens over here? I don't know where in the barrel I put it. Like Old Sona, Old Roma. So I don't know, did I put it in the north of the barrel? Did I put it in the south of the barrel? Did they have coal? Yeah. Everyone agrees that it's bottle. That is bottle. This is actually very interesting. If you look at Rashi is 6 lines up from the bottom. Did I call Yalu? Hold over, let's say the Surah of the English. So let's say this is just fascinating. So now the Gemara wants to say just like this. When do we say Davar Sheba Minyan ain't no bottle? When, to a certain degree, still quote unquote like discernible, recognizable. So like in this case, here's what I know. I know that there are Truma pigs sitting on the mouth of one of these utensils. That is an incontestable truth. Incontestable proof. But the Gemara says, when the pigs, let's say, were mixed in. So let's say I mixed in the pigs, then everyone agrees it's bottle in 100 to 1 ratio. Why? Because since it's not recognizable and discernible, therefore the regular laws of kick in. So this section is very interesting. So apparently, and it's easy to qualification, even if you hold Davar Sheba Minyan is not bottle, that's only if the mixture is in a way where there's some level of recognizability, right? Where there's some level ultimately again of identifiability. But if it's a cohesive mixture, especially like this, we have like a min domino, right? Where it's just a whole challenge of pigs, right? So it doesn't sound good, right? But let's understand, right? It's a whole mixture of pigs, right? So the mice again, even if you're done in a bottle, that's what you would say. Okay, that was just to point out again, this whole discussion ultimately again was for that statement of Rabbi Yeshua. So therefore the Gemara is suggesting now that perhaps the reason why in our Mishnah the prohibited animal is not bottled in the mixture of the permitted animals is because it is the Davar Sheba Minyan. Davar Sheba Minyan is reckoned individually, and therefore halacha l'maisa no bottle. Good. So the Gemara goes back to Rashi. Rashi says, I will say, now remember again, those I also want to point out, remember this whole discussion of Davar Sheba Minyan, this whole discussion of Eshedat Galindos, Kolshedat Galindos is very important, not just halachically, but it's also incredibly important hashkatically as well. I would say this idea of a Davar Sheba Minyan low bottle is the source of the nitzchias, of the eternality of the Jewish people. You look at our story, and it makes absolutely no sense. The story of our people, it makes no sense. How can it be that a nation that is so small in number, right, is so outsized in its influence, and that no matter what has been thrown our way, not only do we survive, but we thrive? How is it that we have not been swallowed up in the sands of time? How is it that we're not bottled in a world that is so much greater than us? And what's the answer? Dominion in a bottle. Because also, when you have something where every individual unit is of significance, it's never bottled. What's the power of Klal Yisrael? The power of Klal Yisrael is, yes, we are an incredibly powerful holy nation that is made up of ridiculously amazing individuals. There is no such thing as a Yid, as a Jew who is not special. There is no such thing as a Jew who does not possess limitless koach. There is no such thing as a Jew who is not able to move heaven and earth. Each of us, because each of us is a davar shebeminyan. Davar shebeminyan. Don't say that's right, by the way, right? So when we're counting for a minion, we never go 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, right? So that's a whole discussion in Gemara about that bracha is only short of saying a son of an ayin. You don't count. Why? Because when you count someone, you limit them to a number, you're minimizing their influence. A Jew is the most powerful thing the world has ever seen. Each of us is a davar shebeminyan. Because we are davar shebeminyan, there's a simple halacha. Let's talk about davar shebeminyan in a bottle. In a bottle. You want to know the mitzvahs, the ties of each mouth of the Jewish people? It's Svachim Ayin Gimel Amud Aleph, Svachim 73a. Called davar shebeminyan afilu b'drabanan l'botol b'choshin d'oraisa. The world can't negate us. The world can't eradicate us. The world can't unravel us. Why? Because yes, we are powerful as a nation, but also because as individuals, each of us possesses an immeasurable holiness, immeasurable importance, and therefore, no matter what, we are never bottled. Incredible. Let's go back to the Rashi says, the Rashi says, remember again, remember the Rabbanon? You're like, no. Alright, okay, so good. That's why I'm here. Right, so the Rabbanon said in the second, listen, you gotta get a little bit more excited about this stuff, right? They said, this is gold. This is absolute gold.
Meanwhile, your dad can be sitting there watching TV with a
stronger brew, like what's going on over there? What are you saying? Like, is this like Starbucks blonde? Like, what is this? Come on. I'm 4 cups in already. I get started. This energy is not natural. This is, this is like performance enhancing stuff over here. So the nice stuff. So I thought you could start at 5 Okay, so this is so Lamesa is very important. Remember, the Rabbanon in the Mishnah and Arla, the Mishnah and Arla were the ones who said that there are only normally 6 things that are not bottled. Right? Remember, we saw this in yesterday's episode. Kiva added in 7. This was like, the pomegranates, it goes a crack, the limonade bazan. So we might think so. Now, the issue with that is, according to the Rabbanon, right, if you know that there are only 6 things that are not bottled, according to the Akiva, the 7, remember, Rabbi Akiva added on, Kikaron Shal Nachtom, the loaves of just the regular balabas. So according to that, we're kind of back to our same question, which is, so why not say that the further the animal is bottled? So that's some people Rabbanon, listen to this. Even according to the Rabbanon who say that really, an animal should be bottled in a greater mixture. That really should happen. But even the Rabbanon would agree that Allah again, even in our Mishnah, the animal would not be bottled. Why not? Listen to this. So he said, ultimately, so this is very interesting. Even the Rabbanon say that animals are kosher. So because animals are kosher, therefore they are not bottled. So once again, what you see happening is something very interesting over here, that everybody seems to be coming around to this same idea, that although when you look at our Mishnah, it is tempting to apply the normative laws of nullification, it's not going to work for the simple idea that an animal is an important unit. Whatever halachic terminology you want to use, es shadar kalimnos, kol shadar kalimnos, davar shebeminyan, bottom line is it's kosher. That's the bottom line. Bottom line is it is kosher, and therefore halacha l'maisa is not possible. So listen, now watch this. The Gemara says is great. The name Shach V'Nikon Chadbinayo. The name are called the Parish. Wow. So let's listen to this. I have a good idea. Once I understand that really I can't go ahead and look at the group as a whole. Right? Because let's just go back to this, whatever case you want to say, right? The chatos, I have a chatos animal and the owner died, it gets mixed with other chatos animals. And I have a Mishnah that says I'm stuck, right? Because an animal is chashuv, and therefore I'm local again, I can't do anything with the group. So I have a great idea. Let me go over to the group, we go to the cover of animals, and instead of dealing with them as a group, take them out one at a time. Now, let's say I go over to the group. I take out animal one. There's a concept of saying halacha of kol polish, beruba polish. When something separates from the whole, we could assume that it separates from the majority. Now, what's the majority of this animal chevra? Majority animal chevra? Right, majority permitted animals. Maybe the Chaz's case is not the case, but trying to say in any case, the Mishnah you want. Go ahead and just take one out, and you can assume that the item separate out from the majority. So, see, you know what Gemara is saying? You're going to run into a problem when you look at the group as a group. Why? Why are they going to run into a problem? Because the prohibited animal is not buckled in the group. So Gemara says something great. Don't look at it as a group. Instead, what should you do? Start pulling out one animal at a time. And when you pull out one animal at a time, again, the both say, when you go out to the animal camera, you pull out one animal. What is the statistical probability? That it's mutter. Why? Because the majority of animals are mutter. And we have a concept like that in halacha. We're going to see in this moment. Called the parish, the ruba parish. And let's give you a simple example of this. You go ahead and you have just I'm skipping on the Gemara just for a second. You're walking on the street. You find a piece of meat in the street. Your times have changed a little bit, but you find a piece of meat in the street, right? In your particular locale, there are 9 butcher shops, 1 non-kosher butcher shop. What's the status of the meat? What's the status of the meat? Mutter. Mutter. Why? Because I assume that meat came from a kosher butcher shop. So this is great. Why don't you sell something like this? Just take one animal at a time. And every animal ultimately is going to be taken out. Ultimately what? Because that's kosher. So let's say better, it was a tremendous metaphor. Also, tremendous metaphor. The whole problem that we're running into is because we're looking at this problem right as a group. Instead of Gemara saying just taking out one animal at a time, I think it's tremendous metaphor for the following. Sometimes in life a person has a lot going on, or maybe all the time in life a person has a lot going on. Like, I've got a herd of problems. So we'll say, so what happens when you try to go ahead and deal with your herd of problems? What happens? It's way too overwhelming. And generally most of us, when we get overwhelmed in life, what do we do? Absolutely nothing. We shut down and we freeze. So sometimes the avoid in life is don't attack a herd of problems, but instead what should you do? One animal problem at a time. Look at one thing from the herd at a time. Don't try to tackle everything because it's not going to work, right? You're just going to get overwhelmed and chances are you'll do absolutely nothing. But if you address your herd of problems one animal at a time, then you can deal with it. Now, for most of us, it's so uncomfortable because when I'm only attacking one animal at a time, one problem at a time, I know that there's all these other problems that remain unsolved. Yeah, part of life is learning to accept the fact that you're going to be living in a state of disrepair for a while longer. But it's okay. As long as you're attacking one animal at a time, you're making good things in your life. Some people could address the herd as a whole. Most of us can't. We just get overwhelmed. Just deal with it. One animal problem at a time. Incredible. So the Gemara said, Nimshach. What do you mean pull it out? You pull out one animal at a time. So the Gemara says, Kavua. The Rabbi says, issue of Kavua. So I'll finish this moment on the base. The Chol Kavua, Kinefza on Nefza Dami. So let me say this outside. So remember, the classic example the Gemara gives about this is the butcher shop. It's the piece of meat. So remember again, going back to our example before. If halacha l'maisa, I'm walking and I find a piece of meat on the ground, right? So again, what's the status of the meat? Let's assume for a moment in my locale, 9 kosher butcher shops, 1 non-kosher one. So what's the status of the meat? What's the status of the meat? Kosher, right? However, let's say I went into a store. I walk out with the package in it. I'm like, I don't remember which store I went into. What's the halacha? The meat is asr. Everyone's like, why the distinction? There's a distinction when the meat came out of its original location versus when I'm going into a primary location. When the meat comes out of its location, then ultimately again we apply the concept of kol deparish meruba parish. Whatever has separated is separated from the majority. When you're going into a location, that's called kol kabua. You're going into a fixed location. Whenever you go into a fixed location, you cannot rely on roads. So what the Gemara is saying is like this. If I'm pulling out an animal from the herd, right? So no one's going to say, I can fix this whole problem. Don't look at the herd, but instead deal with this as an individual animal issue. Pull out one animal at a time. You're one, pulling out one animal at a time, that's finding a piece of meat on the street, because one says, no, it's not. Pulling out one animal at a time is like going into a store. When you go into a fixed location, you can't rely on roads. Pulling out an animal one at a time ultimately is like going into a fixed location, and therefore you can't rely on a road. Which we might say, fine, I can deal with that also. I will base somebody really. We must Allah was this. The shinu did not be the neighbor called the Bashura Parish. Very simple. Scatter the chevra. Scatter the chevra. I don't know. How do you scatter a herd of animals? I don't know, get up and say, in this week's parasha it says, right, and then everyone, right, everyone goes running in different directions, right? So again, whatever you need to do, right, scatter the chevra, and that way, again, if you scatter them, and then you cut them one animal at a time, then they separated, right? Once they disperse, they're no longer kabua, they're no longer fixed in location, and when you take them one at a time, then that's like finding a piece of meat on the street. And you could say, kol deparish meruba parish, whatever has separated, ultimately, again, has separated from the majority. Great cop. So here's the problem. This is fascinating. Zira, listen to this. So interesting. So the Gemara says, so what's the issue? Okay, so let's say we do this. Let's say for argument's sake, there's 10 animals, right? 10 animals. That doesn't really matter what the number is. So we'll say, so now remember again, the case in the Mishnah is where you have a prohibited carbon gets mixed in with a lot of with permitted carbonates, right? That's what's happening here. So now the Gemara is saying, okay, I have a great eight. So what's the eight? Scatter the animals, chop whatever you need, right? And that way, again, everything is permitted. What are we concerned about? We're concerned about it. Let's say everybody does this eitzah. They bring the carbon for the Beis Hamikdash. The concern is that maybe you're going to have 10 kohanim offering up these 10 animals simultaneously. Now, what's the problem with that? The problem with that is, let's say there's 10 animals in the group, right? And now the kohanim are offering these up simultaneously. What do I know? In my heart, what do I know? One of those animals is prohibited. I know that. So because of the concern that maybe everybody's going to attempt this idea, and it could be that all of these animals will be brought to the Beis Hamikdash simultaneously, offered up simultaneously, right? This week goes done simultaneously, and I know that one of them is Asr. Chazal were uncomfortable with this. Look at that in just a moment. So that's my concern, which is quite an interesting concern. But that's my concern. That Allah 10 people will do the same thing. They're going to bring it to the Beis Hamikdash. Everything's going to be done someday, and the Kohanim are going to end up doing Zrika at the same time. And I know that one of those animals potentially is prohibited. So that's the concern. She wants to 1 second. Hold on. I'm going to be Rabban on the Rabbi. First of all, 1 second. What is it? Now you're going to tell me, if we're talking about the concern of doing Zrika at the same time, that means you've already been shafted. Right? That means there's already been Kabbalah. So is it possible to say that animals that were shafted and did Kabbalah, the heter, right, in a permissible way, potentially could then subsequently become usher? Right? In other words, the logic doesn't make sense. So what's the difference is, once the process, once you utilize the mechanism of kol deparish meruba parish, so then really what we have to say is what? The mixture is kind of being disbanded, right? The group, like the band has been disbanded, right? In other words, they're no longer a chevra. If they're no longer a chevra, what are you going to say? That maybe because all 10 people are going to come at the same time, go ahead and just week at the same time, now it's going to become usher again. It doesn't make any sense. Ella, the Gemara says, I'm going to open up on Rabbi Ella, but after I'm going to Rabbi Gemara says, right, you shouldn't shema yavo you kind of as achas for you. So the Gemara says, no. What we're concerned about is if 10 Kohanim go ahead and do this at the same time. Now she says over here, you know, what we're concerned about is the Rosai is, all right, everybody obviously is learning the same Gemara, right? All of five cells on the same daf, on the second spot. What's going to happen if you have this great idea to go out and remedy the prohibited group? Well, let's say a whole bunch of other people have the same idea also. Everybody comes at the same time. It doesn't look right. It doesn't look right when the group is being disbanded. Everybody's using this mechanism. When I know full well that someone's walking around with the prohibited animal, right? In other words, at the end of the day, somebody is walking away with the animal that is ocean. The prohibited animal is still going to be utilized. We're uncomfortable with that. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. One second. Is it possible for 10 Kohanim to craft an animal simultaneously? When you're worried about Zrika, could you have simultaneity in Zrika? Yeah, that absolutely could happen. I will say, now here's what's interesting. If you're talking about disbanding the group and going ahead and chasing after the animal. Listen, have you ever chased after an animal? Have you ever chased after a sheep? Right? No, right. Everyone's off of work tomorrow, it might be, I don't know, it might be a nice activity with the family, right, or I guess the turkey's more, right, but nice, again, so what are the chances of simultaneity when running after a group, right, that doesn't sound like you could actually establish simultaneity over this. So let's say, remember again, the whole issue is only where there's simultaneity, because remember again, where there's no simultaneity, we're fine, right, the issue is 10 people doing the same thing at the same time. It's hard to turn a blind eye to the fact that someone is walking away with a living animal. But if there's not simultaneity, we're totally okay. So if we're talking about 10 Kohanim showing up and disbanding the group at the same time, you're going to have to chase the animals. There's no simultaneity in acquisition in that case. The Rabbi says, Yishum Kavua. The Rabbi said, at the end of the day, the reason we don't like this approach is because ultimately, again, our kavua. That's really what it is. Rashi says, Mishum kavua. It's the last short line in Rashi. Elamar Mishum kavua. Doma asr limshach. Doma asr limshach. The Gemara says, Ulam Sabinu. Chad chad. Kilo naidi. The real concern over here, ultimately, again, is not about when you actually disperse the group. The real issue over here is actually, again, if you are concerned, you won't disperse the group. That's actually what we're concerned about over here. That halakha l'maisa, you won't end up properly dispersing the group, and you'll end up actually taking it from a fixed group, which is truly halakha l'tana. Which is also, it makes sense. In other words, the Gemara is being loaded up. Let's say I would agree that there is a mechanism to go ahead, disperse the group, whatever comes therefore from the group is called the parish me group of parish, that would work, but the Maisa we're concerned that you'll take the animal without dispersing the group, and if you do that, it's kavua, and if it's kavua, you're really halachically problematic area. Rabbi says as follows, Hashki the Amri Rabbanon lo nakrid, nakrid lo nakrid. It's supposed to be amazing incredible. Now Rabbi will at least begin this today. Rabbi is a really exciting Gemara. So therefore, again, halakha l'maisa, it turns out that really, we're right back to the Mishnah, which is when you have the prohibited item mixed in, ultimately, again, with the group, so what happens? The group remains prohibited. Now, even though, again, now, for a variety of different reasons, it's kosher, it's important, and therefore it's not fatal. Now, the Gemara just suggested an idea as how you could go ahead and ultimately utilize the animals. How would you do that? Essentially, disperse the group. And if you disperse the group, you could say, call the parish meruba parish. I don't like it at the end. I'm not going to let you do it because at the end, I'm concerned you're going to end up coming to take from the animals without dispersing the group. And if you take it without dispersing the group, then you're taking it from a fixed location. And whenever you take it from a fixed location, what's the issue? You take it from a fixed location, ultimately, again, it's awesome. It's awesome. Good. So now we can go with that. So Rabbi says, Hashad the Amir Rabbanon lo nakrid. Now that the Rabbanon say, you can't go ahead and offer anything from that collective group. If you did so, The cover doesn't work. The cover doesn't work. So we'll stop over here for today. We'll pick up with Rabbi tomorrow.
So getting this experience.
Yeah, I should have gotten a little bit further on such a short daf, but okay. You know, it's good. Baruch Hashem. Okay, tomorrow. What's tomorrow? Is tomorrow Sunday schedule? Sunday schedule. Okay. All right, I'll send that schedule later on in Baruch Hashem. It looks like Shkoyach. Incredible. Incredible. Have a great day. Have a Zoom. Have a great day, everyone.
In countries that have legalized or decriminalized it at least, and you can get it and not have to worry about it being adulterated in some way, it seems like the statistics are overwhelmingly pointing one direction.
100%. But those are smaller countries, and they don't have the consumption problem that America has. We uniquely love to consume drugs, and we are propping up the cartel by doing that. And if you want to go to war with the cartel, if you want to really stop the flood of illegal drugs in this country, unfortunately, one of the only ways to really do that accurately is to stop them.
All right, we'll say good morning. Good morning. Let us begin by thanking all of our sponsors for this morning's share. To thank our Talmud Torah sponsors for the month of Kislev Haba Alinu Litova. Allison Adam Steinitz, in memory of Adam's grandfather, Rabbi Sheldon Steinitz, Harav Shlomo Tzvi, Ruvain Ben Shimon Zichron Libracha. In honor of his Neshama Shtav and Aliyah, to be a Meilitz Yosher for his children, grandchildren, and 934 great-grandchildren. Semi Malka Estes, in the memory of their parents, Ludwig Stifel, Yitzchak Leib Ben Aaron Cohen, Sarah Stifel, Sarah Rachel Bas Baruch Avram, Hinda Estes, and Hinda Bas Henech Ephraim, in memory of their dear family friends, Staff Sergeant Naftali Yonah Gordon, Shani Cohen Gamo, Felon Darrell in Gaza, Eric Hanukkah, 2023, and Paul and Kathy Pollack for dedicating the Sherman Churches this month in memory of Paul's sister Leah Bas Shmuel and Zachrini, Shulamis Bas Shmuel, Esther Bas Zachariah. Our week of learning sponsors, Baruch Meir and Rina Dubin, in honor of the upcoming Hasana of their daughter Sophie, Zevi Granat, and Yas Hashem, which will take place this evening. B'Sha'ah Tova U'Metzlachas, a Manzul Tov to the Dubin family. Chashem and Kalash B'Zokah, Yas Hashem to build a binyan Adiad Mazel Tov. Mazel Tov.
These guys.
Our Daf Yomi sponsors for today is Ayala and Sarah Steinberg in the source of a continuing refuah for Shulamis Hana Bas Susha, as well as Matt and Diane Marks, wishing a Mazel Tov to Baruch Meir and Rina Dubin on the upcoming marriage of their daughter Sophie to Zevi Granat of Edgware, England. Mazel Tov against the Chassan and Kala. Mir Tashem, Ish Bizocha, to stand under the Chub B'Shar Tov, build a binyan. Build a home that Emer Tashem is filled with Mazel Bracha, Simcha, and Kedusha, and Never Hashem Shalom Tovos. All of them is Neshama Shtav and Aliyah. All those who need a report, Shabbat together with Kol Kol Yisrael, who should continue to share B'Soros Tovos upon all of Klal Yisrael. So with that, let us begin a really exciting daf ahead of us today. Today's daf is Ayin Beis 72, and we left off on Ayin Aleph on the base 71b. And we left off actually kind of like in the middle of a sentence, but it's actually its own contained thought. So we'll say, so again, the Lavi Suri Hanoni. So 2, 4, 5 lines up in the bottom, 71b. So if you remember again, our entire discussion of yesterday's daf was really focused on this idea that there are two Mishnayos. There's a Mishnah of the Maseches Zvachim, which is the Mishnah that we had on Ayin Amud onto Ayin Aleph, onto Ayin Aleph Amud. The first Mishnah of this new parak, and a Mishnah in Maseches Tzmura. Now, both of those Mishnayos seem to be saying the same exact thing, which is whenever you have a prohibited animal that gets mixed into a mixture, ultimately, again, the prohibited animal is not bottled, it is not nullified, and again, we're going to get more into the mechanics of that today a little bit in Yom Hashem, and as a result, the entire mixture becomes prohibited. That's ultimately, again, what's unfolding over here. Now, the Gemara was obviously trying to understand why the redundance, why do I need what seems to be the same Mishnah twice. So essentially, the answer that the Gemara was giving was that Halacha L'Maaseh, the Mishnah Maseches Zvachim and the Mishnah Maseches Tzmura were really dealing with different levels of prohibition. Is the prohibited animal ultimately again Asur Ba'ano, not Asur Ba'ano? That was the distinction. So that was actually the last distinction the Gemara made. So the Gemara actually picks up and the Gemara says, the Lavi Suri Hana, the Lavi Suri Hana, so the Gemara says, 1 second, but our Mishnah also talks about cases of animals that got mixed in that are not Isuri Hana. If once again, if that's the case, then why the need for the Mishnah Maseches Tzmura at all? To which the Gemara says, Mikatoni Bekama, Koshin Hasam Katani. So the Gemara says, but 1 second. Does the Mishnah talk about, again, halacha l'maisa, numbers? See, our Mishnah talks about numbers. It talks about the idea that even the choshu, even any amount, ultimately can create issues. So again, our Mishnah speaks about numbers. The Mishnah in Tmura does not speak about, ultimately, again, numbers. So the Gemara says over here, the Nisniha, Solo Bayna. So just write the Mishnah in Tmura and don't write the Mishnah in Tzvachim. In other words, just go ahead and just put everything. Just go ahead and put everything in Tmura. Which the Gemara says is very interesting. Hatakanta, someone said Takanta Shtichalek. Mostly what our Mishnah does is actually something very interesting, which the Mishnah Masechus Tmura does not do, which discusses the remedy. Remember again, I will say, if you notice, in every case of mixture, our Mishnah speaks about, first of all, again, the nature of the prohibition, and then tells you how to remedy the issue. Now remember again, there are different remedies for different cases, but just to give you an example of remedy, so it could very well be that in some cases, for example, let's say let everything graze until you develop a loam, sell it off, and then use the value of the most expensive animal to purchase the type of carbon that get mixed in. Whatever the remedy is, the point over here of our Mishnah is our Mishnah discusses not just problems, but our Mishnah ultimately again discusses solutions. So the Gemara says the Mishnah Masechus Tmura discusses problems and no solutions. The Mishnah Masechus Tzvachim ultimately again discusses problems and discusses solutions. And the Gemara essentially says we need Mishnayos that discuss solutions. I must say, what a tremendous Mussar skill. There are two different kinds of people in life. There are many more than two different kinds of people, but for our purposes, two different kinds of people in life. People who are incredibly adept at identifying problems. And they can tell you the problem with every single thing in the world. And they can tell you problems in alphabetical order, chronological order, most severe to less severe. Your problems, someone else's problems, not their problems, right? All the problems in the world, right? And I always say, but the one thing they never have are solutions. And there are people like that. And again, it's a skill, not just like a sense, an ability to detect and to identify problems. And then I will say there are other people who, Baruch Hashem, yes, also can identify problems, but also have the God-given talent to find solutions. There is a solution, or at least an approach to every single problem. Be a solution-oriented person. Be a person who is good at identifying what's broken, but then also comes forward with a way, with a derech, with a plan to fix it. You could be a Tamura Jew, which means find problems, or you could be a Zvachim Jew, which means find problems and identify solutions. Incredible. The Gemara goes like that. The head yoke, not make comments. The Gemara says 1 second. Now, the other interesting distinction that the Gemara wanted to make is that perhaps the Mishnah Tmura discusses the idea that halacha l'maisa, that if a prohibited animal gets mixed in, the mixture is not only prohibited for karbanos, but ultimately again prohibited even for mundane everyday use. To which the Gemara says, well, 1 second. Our Mishnah also, not our Mishnah, but we also learned elsewhere about hedyot. So I will say, so hedyot means, remember, as opposed to, let's say, the Mishnah Tmura, which referenced karbanos, right? The Gemara wanted to suggest that maybe the Mishnah Masechus Tmura is necessary because it speaks out the idea that when you have something prohibited, you get mixed into a mixture, it's even prohibited for mundane use. So the Gemara says the notion that a prohibited mixture is prohibited even for mundane usages. We have that in a different Mishnah. Where is that? The most little Chazara, the Sefes Avodah Zarah. So Zara, by the way, that was a good Masechta, right? Remember Avodah Zachim is that simple also, but Avodah Zarah every day was like, phew. Okay, we must as follows. The hedyot what we do Asurim goes from the culture. Both of the following items are prohibited, and when they get mixed into a mixture, they prohibit in any amount. What are these items? Yayin Nesach. So let's remember again. Yayin Nesach is one that is used for Avodah Zarah. Avodah Skochavim and Avodah Zarah. So it says, so these are items that when they get mixed in, ultimately again prohibit in any amount. Now take a look at before you turn the page, take a look at the last Rashi on 71b. Rashi the hedyot. Rashi says, Nami Tanle de Masechus Avodah Zarah. We learned this in Avodah Zarah already. That when you have something that is asur ba'ana, right? It is not batal baro. I will say, I can remember, I think I mentioned this in yesterday's daf, but my days were off a little bit because yesterday's daf I did on Sunday. I recorded on Sunday. So again, in the previous daf, remember the whole novelty also, and we're going to discuss this more today, is in general mita oraisa. Whenever you have something prohibited that gets mixed into something permitted, what's the halacha? Right? Chad betray. Generally, the Torah says that prohibited items are batal in a simple majority. Simple majority. The Torah says follow the majority. So this notion that now you have things that are getting mixed in that are not batal is very unique on a biblical level. Again, we're going to discuss this more. But here we're actually saying over here that halacha l'maisa, if you're seeing it as asur ba'an, and it gets mixed in, even if it's mixed into an overwhelming majority of permitted material, mystery lahedya, it is asur, and not only asur for sacrificial purposes, but asur even for everyday mundane purposes. So the Gemara says, "V'lamali lemisnei hacha b'chatas hamesos b'shahar niskas." Now the Gemara is asking over here. We already learned the concept that if you have something that is prohibited asur ba'ana that gets mixed in with other permitted items, that is asur ba'ana. We already learned that in Avodah Zarah. Where do we learn it? That if you have some yayin nesa, and if you have some Avodah Zarah that gets mixed in with permitted items, halacha l'maisa, the entire mixture is asur ba'ana. So if that's the case, why do I need this to be stated in our Mishnah over here in Zvachim? Top of Ayin Beis 72a. So let's listen to this Rabbi say. I'll tell you why. Because if it was just based on the Gemara Maseches Avodah Zarah, Hava Amina Lahedyot, I would have said ultimately again, when do we say that if an item that is asur ba'ana gets mixed in with a lot of permitted material, that ultimately again the resulting mixture is asur? When is that so? Lahedyot, for mundane purposes. But if you're talking about karbanos, then ema lo nisginu l'kulu. And maybe you're about to say, you have to understand something. I might have thought like this. It was just from the Gemara Maseches Avodah Zarah. I would have thought, when did he say that if something is asur ba'ana, it gets mixed in with other items that the resulting mixture is asur? That's only the hegel. That's only for everyday mundane purposes. But by karbanos, no, I'm not going to say that the resulting mixture is asur. Why? Because if the resulting mixture is asur, then what? Then what's the issue? You're causing a loss to hektish. And I might have thought that again, we don't cause such a loss to hektish. Therefore, again, our Mishnah comes along and says, no, when it comes to Yisuri Hana, even for sacrificial purposes, it is still going to be asur. And if you would have just written the Mishnah over here by Havamina, I would have thought like this. When do we say that if something is asur ba'ana and it gets mixed in with other items, the resulting mixture is asur? When is that? I would have thought that that's only for sacrificial purposes. Why? Because literally translated, it's disgusting. What does that mean? That the notion of potentially using something for sacrificial purposes that is prohibited, so that's a no-go. So maybe it's not for sacrificial purposes that the resulting mixture is also. About chulin, when it comes to mundane things, about chulin, the Gemara says the low ma'is, which is not disgusting. I would have thought that ultimately, again, we should employ typical bittul baro, right? Makes nullification in a simple majority. Therefore, it's tzricha. Therefore, I will say this is incredibly important. So essentially, it turns out that I really have three different sources for these concepts. We have a Mishnah Maseches Tmura, we have a Mishnah Maseches Zvachim, and we ultimately again have a Mishnah Maseches Avodah Zarah. Interestingly enough, now at the Gemara, so yesterday's daf was really much more focused on Mishnah Zvachim, Mishnah and Tmura. Now, Mark introduced us to this idea that there's another Mishnah. Why do I need this Mishnah in Maseches Avodah Zarah? This is very important because what Avodah Zarah brings to the table of Osai is that when you have Isurei Hana that get mixed into a mixture, the resulting mixture is going to be asur, even what we call lehedyot. Even for simple mundane use. Our Mishnah Maseches Zvachim highlights the idea that when a Isurei Hana get mixed in with other items, the resulting mixture is asur legavoa. You cannot use it for sacrificial purposes. Avodah Zarah teaches us you can't even use it for mundane purposes. And both are necessary. Why? Because if it was just ultimately, again, avodah zarah, I would have thought, okay, the resulting mixture is also for mundane purposes, but for sacrificial purposes, you're not going to cause such a loss to the Beis Hamikdash. Okay, therefore I need avodah zarah. And if it would have just said tzvachim, I would have said the resulting mixture ultimately, again, is also for the Beis Hamikdash, because it's not nice to offer something up like this in the Beis Hamikdash. But for Hedyot, it's mutter. Therefore, avodah zarah, as long as it's needed for mundane purposes, it's going to be awesome. So I will say, bottom line is that what all of these composites are teaching us is that when you have something that is asur b'ana that gets mixed in with other permitted items, the resulting mixture is going to be asur both l'gavoah for the Beis Hamikdash and ultimately again for hedyot, for regular mundane use. Now, what's important to understand is depending on the nature of the mixture, there may be remedies, right? And that's our Mishnah. Our Mishnah discusses all of the ways that you can rectify these prohibited mixtures. Now, again, remember, one caveat is important to understand that halach l'maisa, not everything has a remedy. Because remember, again, that's the first piece of our Mishnah, where the chashas cases, where ultimately, again, not every single thing, not every single problem has a solution. It's not every single mixture has a remedy. But l'maisa, again, our Mishnah is all about the remedies. Good. So we'll say, so now we've taken care of the Mishnah in Tzvachim, we've taken care of the Mishnah in Torah, we've taken care of the Mishnah in Zazman. Now the Gemara goes back and kind of like dials us back a little bit. I don't understand. Why don't we apply typical bittul berov? Right? In other words, here's what's fascinating. Let's say the Mishnah is operating under an assumption. And what's the assumption? That the prohibited item is not negated, is not buckled, is not nullified in the majority. So take this path. Why not? Why not? Again, I just want to point out, if you look at Rashi, Rashi says it's the third line from the top. But the Haksif Achirav Mahatos. The Bible says this is incredibly important. Mida Oraisa. So Isser, prohibited matter, is nullified in a simple majority. That is biblical law. Simple majority. So then you might just ask, understand, why in all of these cases, whatever it is, whatever it is, why isn't it batal barov? So we'll say, this is really interesting. Or maybe you'll say like this, because these items are significant, therefore what? They're not batal. They're not batal. See, I was like, what's the whole idea of bittul? Right? The whole idea of bittul is that ultimately, again, when you have an item that finds itself in a majority, the identity of the minority is swallowed up by the minority. But again, however, that's not necessarily true where the minority item is chashuv. If it's important, then the mice again is not bottled. It's not bottled. To which the Gemara says, so maybe the items discussed in the Mishnah are chashuv, and therefore v'lo bottled. And therefore, ultimately, again, they're not bottled. So once again, ready for this. This is so super exciting. The Gemara says,